If I can have members of council to please come into the council chambers. It's 2:10. This meeting is now resumed. Before the recess, Council was considering item LS 24.2 on a work plan for review of Chapter 545 licensing body rub parlors and holistic centers. Members, I suggest that before we consider any other business, that we enact the general bills in a confirming bill. Councilor Jamari, you have a motion regarding the consideration of submissions on zoning bylaw and official plan amendments?
Yes, but every councillor I showed it to doesn't understand it. The committee and council considered submissions in making a decision on zoning bylaw and official plan amendments.
Question to the mover.
On favor, recorded vote.
Question to the mover. Would she be named in the judicial?
Councillor Bailao, please. Councillor Peruzza.
One of the submissions.
A bill.
Deputy Mayor, please. Deputy Mayor.
The motion carries 28-1.
Councillor Fragadakis?
Yes, Madam.
You have a motion to introduce certain bills.
Yes, that leave be granted to introduce bills 460 to 526.
Shall leave be granted to introduce these bills? Recorded vote.
We're one short.
Well, there was only 28 a minute ago.
Councillor Peruzza, please.
Okay, we have 30.
Councillor Wong Tam. Councillor Layton. Councillor Hart, please. Councillor Matlow.
Yes. Okay.
Councillor Burnside.
Motion to introduce general bills carries 28-1.
Okay, so that's still only 29. Shall these... Yes. Shall these bills be passed and declared as a bylaw? Recorded vote.
Councillor Davis. Councillor Peruzza, please. Councillor Peruzza, your vote, please.
Don't let anyone out of this room. I want to go home too.
The motion to enact the bills carries 29-1.
Councillor Fillion, you have a motion to introduce the confirming bill.
That leave be granted to introduce the bill to confirm to the point of the introduction of this motion the proceedings of City Council meeting 39 on April 24th, 25th, 26th, and 27th, 2018.
Shall leave be granted to introduce this bill? Recorded vote.
Councillor Wong-Tam, please. Councillor Davis. Councillor Wong-Tam, please, your vote.
The motion to introduce the confirming bill carries 30-1.
Shall these bills be passed and declared as a bylaw? Recorded vote.
Councillor McMahon, please. Councillor Layton. Councillor Wong-Tam.
Councillor Mihevc, please.
The motion to enact the confirming bill carries 31-1.
Okay, so now we can introduce Councillor Matlow. You have 30 members, 31. Hurry up before we lose them.
I move it.
Okay, there we are.
Thank you.
On favor? Carried. All right. Do we have any more to be introduced? Okay, Councillor Holliday, you have one on behalf of Councillor Cressy.
I do, on my for my good colleague, to introduce a motion concerning an AGCO application for 214 King Street West.
On favor? Carried. Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a release of Section 37 money for a project to be completed this summer.
On favor? Carried. Okay, that's it. Is anybody prepared to release any quick items? Put your name in the middle. Councillor Wong-Tam.
Madam Speaker, TE 31.93, this is the party clause. I have a motion to put on the screen. It's just to amend something very quickly. And I don't...
Yeah, okay, just take your time.
Sure. There you go. It's 4 pages, but some very minor changes.
Okay.
Thank you.
On favor? Carried. Item is amended. On favor? Carried. Thank you. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you very much. And this is, oh my gosh, I forget the number. PE 26.5 biodiesel we've been working on forever. I think page 4. Councillor DiCiano had held it and was going to send it over to me. He's not here, so I'm here. And basically it accelerates the plan to have a greener fleet.
Okay.
Small cost recovery.
On favor? Carried. Okay, so we'll, Councillor Carmichael Grip.
I just have a quick release on behalf of Councillor Shiner, who is not here, and Councillor Davis, who has a very quick motion, amendment, page 5, CC 39.7, 90 Eastdale Avenue, 2 Seacourt Avenue.
Okay, just one sec. Councillor Davis?
I also have an amendment, and if you'd indulge me a few remarks with it, we could dispose of it. It's important.
Okay, Councillor Carmichael Greb. Councillor Carmichael Greb, did you have a motion, or you're just releasing it?
I
Or
was
you're
going to
just,
release it, but
you're
Councillor
passing on to
Davis
Councillor Davis? Okay, thank you.
No.
No, okay, what is it then?
Councillor, I was going to move it on behalf of Councillor Shiner, who's holding it.
No, Councillor Davis is holding it.
No. She's not.
CC 39.7, Councillor Davis is holding it.
Sorry, Councillor Shiner has a motion to amend it. Sorry. Councillor Davis has another amendment. I was releasing it with the amendment. Does that make sense? Okay.
Councillor Carmichael Greb, you have a motion on behalf of Councillor Shiner.
Correct. Sorry, yes.
Okay, and we have, okay, it's on the screen. Okay.
Long day.
Thank you. Now, Councillor Davis, yours.
I also have a motion if you can post it. And it speaks for itself. It asks the council to request the landowner to organize a public information meeting prior to the board meeting on May 22nd, and to have the property owner pay for all of the costs associated with it. And I do want to say to my colleagues, many of whom have probably been put in the same position as I have experienced, I think, what is one of the most egregious processes that I have
Speaker, this
seen.
is going to be a long item. She's talking ad nauseum. No. Hold it. Hold it down.
Councillor Perruzza.
Nice way to say it.
I'll let her finish.
Count.
Let her finish.
No, Councillor Perruzza, please. We're allowing Councillor Davis. We're at the end of the agenda. We're trying to get items done with. So I've allowed Councillor Davis just to speak briefly on it, even though it's a quick item. Councillor Davis, do you want to continue?
Thank you. It's an application that's been in various forms for 10 years. In its most recent form, it came forward, and or previous form, we had a settlement at the board. And we worked very hard with the community to get support for that settlement at the board. And the applicant decided that that was not satisfactory to them any longer and filed another application in which we have a refusal report that has now been appealed to the board. And I have to say this process that has brought us to a place where we have new directions on purple paper that leaves the community completely out of any involvement in what is before us. And this process that lacks transparency and fairness, I know all of you have experienced it before. And I have to say that I will not be voting for what is before us, and not only because the process that forces our staff and us to make a decision at the 11th hour before a board hearing on something that is significant in the community is unacceptable, but the content I also do not agree with. And while I can't speak about it in public, I will be voting against it, and hopefully the community will have an opportunity to understand what's in the confidential document prior to the board hearing. So I will not be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so if we can put the motions on the screen, please. Councillor Carmichael Greb's motion first on behalf of Councillor Shiner. All in favor? Record it. Yeah, I know. But we're in the middle of a vote now.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor Ajmeri, please.
Councillor Campbell, please. Councillor De Bearmaker. Councillor Burnside.
The amendment carries 25 to 6.
Okay, on Councillor Davis's motion, put on the screen. Did we want to record a vote on that too?
The motion carries unanimously, 31 in favor.
Okay, item is amended. All in favor? Recorded. Yes. Councillor Fillion.
The item is amended, carries 27 to 5.
Councillor Matlow, would you like to move your member's motion?
Yes, and in lieu of making a longer speech, which I would have if we weren't in this time crunch, I will simply say, may the Ontario Municipal Board suffer a very quick and awful but very timely death.
I second that.
All in favor? Carried. Councillor Layton, would you like to move your member's motion? MM 3934? Okay.
I'll move the recommendation in the motion.
All in favor? Carried. Councillor Holliday, would you like to move on behalf of Councillor Cressy his motion?
Madam Speaker, I will move the motion on behalf of Councillor Cressy.
All in favor? Carried. Recorded on that one? Who asked for recorded vote? Oh, Councillor Argymary's asked for recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, please.
The item carries unanimously, 31 in favor.
Okay, we're going to go back to the body rubs. Councillor Fletcher, you have questions.
Sorry. No, I'm fine.
You're
Taking my
okay?
name.
Councillor Hart.
Thank you, Speaker. Just some questions of staff. I've heard some comments around possible widespread issues within the investigation component. Can you comment, first of all, on when you hear general complaints like that, do you have investigative techniques that you might want to employ, like reaching out to see if there are any specific complaints, or internal ways that you might want to test that?
So through you, Madam Speaker, yes, sir. So we take all the concerns seriously. Absolutely, we have opened the door for anyone who would like to come forward by any means available to them, or they'd willing to be, to give us further information for us to investigate more completely. Having heard the concerns, we are reviewing the manner in which we've been conducting our investigations in the inspections of these premises. If there are indications that a further review of conduct needs to be undertaken, it will absolutely be undertaken. We will respond to specific complaints. We will respond and investigate any concerns that come to my attention. But as we stand right now, unfortunately, we've got very broad, sweeping, generalized statements that makes that very difficult to investigate specifically. But as a overall review, and you could say investigating our approach, yes, we are, and yes, there are steps we can take where appropriate to determine if there's any conduct issues that need to be addressed.
And one of the challenges, of course, I think there was mention made earlier that when these things occur, usually they are in the industry where there may or may not be problems. You can't really tell if there's problems with that particular business. But I also heard that it could be a kind of a retaliation where in the particular business maybe there's charges laid and that's why they're complaining. But I've also had my own experience where that's more than likely where the problems would occur, because if you have, let's say you have an officer that maybe is stepping across the boundaries, they would be more likely to do it in a business where there have been problems or where there are charges, because in those circumstances, those people would be less likely to come forward for fear of reprisal.
So through you, Madam Speaker, I think, it's inappropriate conduct can occur irrespective. And in this particular case, and we're following the trail of the Ombudsman's report, where you can see the complaints against MLS, we're always in the top 3, and it's either we're over-enforcing or under-enforcing, or the manner in which we're enforcing, and sometimes that is reflective of people not being happy with the actions we have taken. So I don't want to say that where we have laid charges is where misconduct may occur. It may occur where there are no charges. The fact of the matter is the conduct is extremely important. Our oversight and supervision of what our officers are doing is extremely important. And in reviewing any allegations that are made in respect to conduct is extremely important. And taking action to thoroughly investigate where there are allegations or we believe there is misconduct is extremely important. And that's just the way I've been approaching the job here.
And would you agree that it's really important that we get the message out here that for those businesses that have been charged, they are free to come forward with any allegations that they may have. They shouldn't fear reprisal, because that's a completely separate thing. You're doing the business and you're enforcing the way you enforce under the law, and any of those complaints would not skew your opinion or your officer's opinion of their business whatsoever. Is that a fair comment?
It is. So through you, Madam Speaker, Councillor, I've been in law enforcement for 34 years, and every person's voice is important. It doesn't matter if we have charged them. There is no issue of reprisal or concern. If something is not being done appropriately, I want to know about it, and I will investigate that matter thoroughly.
That's great. I'm glad everybody heard that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Karagianis, questions?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I want to thank you. Through you to staff, I think something along the line of Councillor Hart, I want to ask a few questions. I have found your staff to be very attentive, very thorough and very professional in dealings with a lot of things in MLS that I brought to their attention. Now, would you say, or is it natural to say that your staff are equally working, or would your staff in this instance, when they be looking after the holistic or body rubs, whatever you want to call them, they would be a little bit more aggressive? Or will they be just as in other circumstances have an equally professional outlook on how they approach their work?
Through you, Madam Speaker, our endeavour is always to ensure that the officers and all of my staff are conducting themselves in a professional manner, in a fair manner, and in a balanced manner, irrespective of the nature of any enforcement activity they are doing. And thank you for your acknowledgement that they are doing so.
Thank you. Would you say that your staff, if there's any complaints that come forward because either aggressive manner that they're handling or the way that somebody might be dissatisfied, that throughout the MLS that you know, like different auspices that you look after, you got just as equal complaints, or is there one department that gets more complaints than the other about your staff?
So through you, Madam Speaker, just for clarity, in respect to the allegations raised in this case, this is the first time that these have come to my attention since I've been here for these 6 years. I think we equally receive feedback from the community, business community and residents about our officers on a fairly balanced way. We deal with complex issues, we deal with vulnerable people, we deal with maybe some circumstances where we can't get a resolution.
And I thank you. Let me try another way. Would you agree or disagree with me that in this instance, the allegations that are coming forward, is something which is like a tidal wave of complaints versus other MLS work that your department does?
Through you, Madam Speaker, I think what we've heard are issues raised in respect to one particular industry by a variety of individuals. I don't know, I would call it a tidal wave necessarily. We don't have any specific complaints. We have general conduct complaints around what's going on in our enforcement of this industry. You know, I'm not quite sure if I would call it a tidal wave. It is, though, the first time I have heard this type of a widespread commentary around conduct.
In any other, let's say, other industries that you enforced, have you heard such level of amount of complaints?
Through you, Madam Speaker, as I've referenced earlier, we are consistently and continuously in the Ombudsman's top 3 of complaints about the manner in which we undertake our work. That is the nature of law enforcement. I don't know that there was one particular group of mine any greater or less than the other. We generally receive complaints about enforcement as enforcement agencies do.
Would you say that the complaints that you have come, and I'm sure that you're going to check, have raised concerns with you? And how do I put it? I mean, I'm finding hard to fathom that the complaints are real. Maybe I'm wrong, but would you say that, number one, you will investigate these complaints, yes?
So, through you, Madam Speaker, yeah, absolutely. The concerns raised are the feelings of the people who are interacting with our staff. And those, I cannot refute how they are feeling. I need to investigate or understand how we are conducting ourselves and whether there is any misconduct. I don't want to undermine or undervalue the feelings of the individuals that are coming forward en masse. I do encourage them, if they have specific concerns or complaints, to please let us know, and we will review those.
In the last so many years that you've been in your capacity, is this the first time that you're hearing complaints from this particular sector of the industry?
Through you, Madam Speaker, yes, it is.
So you've been doing this for how long? 4 or 5 years, 6 years?
I've been here 6 glorious years, sir.
So fantastic, and I hope that you make it 60. However, in the last 6 years, this is the first time that you're hearing complaints because it just happens that we're dealing with this item. Would I be correct?
Through you, Madam Speaker, I don't want to surmise why the individuals chose to come forward at this time. I am glad people feel that they have a venue to discuss their concerns, and all of those concerns will be considered in our review.
Thank you. Councillor Palacio, questions?
Thank you, Speaker. The moratorium is an interim measure pending the outcome of the comprehensive review that you are planning to do. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Speaker, yes, sir.
So the moratorium will not prevent the existing holistic practitioners to renew their license, in essence?
That is correct, sir.
So they can just continue doing it?
Any currently licensed practitioner, yes, sir.
Yeah, now, I have one of the key questions that, as you may recall, in November, I think it was 2017, we had a report from the Auditor General with very specific conditions as it relates to body wrap parlors and holistics and whatever else. And where the Auditor General questioned the city's reliance on professional holistic associations, the PHAs, right? So my question with regards to that is that there is a work plan in place, as you are recommending within the report. Now, within that work plan, how essential is it for you to bring forward and to work on those recommendations from the Auditor General that were approved by Council? How important it is?
So through you, Madam Speaker, absolutely critically important that we respond to the issues that were raised, and and it did highlight the challenges with the bylaws and the need to review them and ensure that they're relevant and enforceable. It's very important that we do.
Now, there is an advance circulation motion from Councillor one time, and even though that's well-intentioned in terms of what's being asked, I just have some concerns, and that refers mainly to recommendation number 2. I don't know if you had an opportunity to see the advanced circulation. And so where a report is being asked to come forward to City Council by July the 18th. So my question with regards to any further reports, you have a number, your division has a number of directives from Council and also from the committee in terms of bringing forward. I believe that we have 235 directives that have been bundled into projects that you're working on it. How feasible is for you to bring a further report on something that you're working for July of this year, especially if the Toronto Police Services and buildings and MLS will have to report on it? I'm just trying to understand the extent of that report if it was to come forward.
So, through you, Madam Speaker, I would ask first, sir, just clarity on whether or not I should be speaking to contents of a motion that has not been tabled.
Yeah, no, it's...
I know, I see the advanced circulation. I'd just like some clarity from a procedural standpoint, whether or not I ought to be commenting on that.
That's fine. I'll be asking to the mover on that one.
Okay, sorry.
So at this point, we are not targeting any traditional medicine like the holistic wellness, the shiatsu centers, the professional individuals that are providing good services between 9 and 5 o'clock.
Okay, Councillor Palacio, you're asking
not targeting them. Are we?
Councillor Palacio, you're asking a question on a motion that hasn't even been circulated.
That's what I'm asking.
No, that she cannot answer.
No, okay.
Okay, all right. That's just want clarity.
So I'm withdrawing that question.
Yeah, it hasn't been moved yet.
Yeah, so I withdrew that question.
Okay.
So my question was,
yeah, but
we're not targeting the professional ones out there.
So through you, Madam Speaker, in respect to the volume of work that we have outstanding, yes, we have a long, lengthy list of a number of significant items that we need to bring forward. I can't speak specifically to, I don't believe I can speak specifically to what is being asked here, but there are certainly, our intention in our review is to consider the entirety of the issues and the entirety of the regulatory regime currently governing body rub parlors and the holistic licenses. I missed the last part of your question about targeting.
The good business, but I'm just going to ask a different question. Do we know how many illegal body rub parlors do we have out there? Do you have any numbers? Do we know how many hundreds of thousands do we have in the city at the moment?
So through you, Madam Speaker, we do know that through our investigations that a number, probably around 85 to 90% of premises that are currently licensed as holistics may be operating as body rub parlors in contravention of the license they have been issued. We are unaware of any additional premises that may be being used for that purpose that are not licensed. So by our estimates, based on the number, we have over 400 holistic licenses issued. We have a strong concern in respect to at least 85 to 90% of those operating out of compliance with their regulation.
Thank you. Okay, members of council, we need to get this agenda complete. Councillor Perks?
No, I'm good.
You're good? Yep. Councillor Pasternak? Councillor Pasternak?
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to staff. We had a town hall on this very issue in Ward 10 a few years back, and some plainclothes police officers came to discuss their role. How do you balance your role in municipal licensing with the investigative ability of plainclothes officers that can do spot checks not only into the location but into the cubicles, and the various methods these operators are using to evade police enforcement?
So through you, Madam Speaker, thank you, Councillor, for asking a question. There is a distinct difference between our role in the enforcement of our municipal bylaw and the role of the Toronto Police Service, and that what they play in respect to the criminal law. The criminal laws have changed recently. I don't know that it would be appropriate for me to speak to any obstacles or issues that they're having on a policing side. I can say from our bylaw enforcement position that certainly we do encounter locked doors quite often, evading or trying to prohibit our inspections. and we do what we can. We do not engage in plainclothes activity. That has happened in the past in order to gain entry. It is not something that I endorse being done going forward. We are reviewing the entire approach we are taking in addressing what's happening with these premises, including partnership with the police.
But are you harmonizing your role with local police services? Is there...
Through you, Madam Speaker, no, sir. We definitely work in collaboration. We each have very distinct and specific mandates. The police can enforce our municipal bylaws. We cannot and will not enforce criminal code activity.
Understood. Are there any regulations either considered or in place to keeping some of these locations a prescribed distance from schools?
So through you, Madam Speaker, on the body rub parlor license, we do have specific zoning and a defined land use for body rub parlors, and we've identified the industrial zones only for that use. Holistic uses are not a defined use. They are not identified in and of themselves as a legitimate holistic operation as being a sensitive use, so they do not have any kind of distancing requirements. They're supposed to be a very separate and distinct business, but I think you're highlighting very well an important issue of why we need to look at what's happening with the body rub parlor licensing, what has happened to the holistics licensing, and come back to you with a complete report about what we do with this issue overall.
So that'll be coming back to us in the first quarter?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Just very quickly, you've asked the federal and provincial government to have a sort of a national association to self-regulate. Isn't self-regulate 9/10 of the problem here?
Through you, Madam Speaker, that was not a staff recommendation. That was a recommendation adopted by Licensing and Standards Committee. I think what we're going to be coming back with this review is whether or not the role of the PHAs are still involved at all, or we may come back with an entirely different approach on this complete issue for your consideration.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Al-Jamari to speak.
I have an amendment.
Oh, yes, you held yet. I'm sorry, Councillor Al-Jamari. Councillor Karygiannis.
It's been a long week. Madam Speaker, through you, can I ask staff, please? I have two motions to put up on the. Thank you. This is the first one. There's a second one. I want to thank staff for working with me, and I want to thank Councillor Burnside for his intuition and bringing it forward. These are the two motions that we have. They're up. You can read them. Basically, I'm asking folks to support them. Madam Speaker, we're talking about 400 holistic, body rub, et cetera, parlors, and some of them are offering more than just what it's there. Some of them are offering extra pleasures, if I can say. I have to be careful of the language that I don't use unparliamentary language. And in my part of the world, in speaking to 42 Division, I'm told that between Shepherd and Kennedy to Kennedy and Steeles, there's about 38 of them. In speaking to staff here, they said that there were of 8, but there's other ones that are operating in back alleys, in apartments, in houses, and they're under the watchful eye of 42, and I thank them. I want to thank the staff for the work that they're doing. I find it very incomprehensible that at this point in time when we're looking at them, people are stepping forward and saying that staff are aggressive, that staff take irregular measures in order to do things. I have found the staff of MLS, at the most part, and I would say to you about 95%, 98%, that they do their work very diligently, very professionally, and they move from department to department, and for somebody to come up or some people to come up and say that they're aggressive, I find that a little hard to believe. Matter of fact, Madam Chair, there was an instance where people that are in my ward approached me. Matter of fact, were chasing me down the hallway wanting to talk to me. And I said, I thank you very much for coming to speak. I will hear you through the committee. I'm not interested in speaking to you at this juncture. This is an industry that brings in I want to thank Councillor Davis for paying attention to my words of wisdom, Madam Chair. You're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, this is an industry that has and invites criminal aspects. This is an industry that that has trafficking of young individuals, especially young girls and young ladies. And this is an industry that snake eyes, as they call them. They approach the individuals in their country, and I know of this fact in the work that I had done as a member of Parliament, and they say to them, it will cost you so much, we'll provide passage for you to Canada. And when these young ladies arrive in Canada, unfortunately, they end up doing work in this industry, doing extracurricular activities that are not something that I would like to mention. And these activities, they are there enslaved for a number of years. And I want to thank the work that they're doing. It's indeed, it's our responsibility to make sure that in working with the police department, working with our enforcement officers, that we stamp this out, we put an end to it, and we can do whatever we can in order to make sure that human trafficking, human exploitation of young and vulnerable women is not happening. This should not be allowed to happen in Canada. We should absolutely, absolutely not support this. And for people to step forward and say that our folks are aggressive and our folks are taking extra measures, I find that a little hard to believe. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Al-Jamari.
I have a motion. And Speaker, I move this motion because we have undergone a very frustrating series of events in my community where the local establishment has changed hands nominally. You know, they would put it in their mother's name or the brother's name or a cousin's name or a friend's name at the 11th hour when the tribunal was set to perhaps revoke their license. This is a loophole that we have to close. And so that's why I'm moving this motion. This particular establishment is placed in a regeneration area. In a regeneration area that is set to explode in Downsview. All good things, all things that are going to make the community very proud to live and work in Downsview. We want it to be a place where people want to walk their children on the streets. We want it to be a place where it's a fun place to go to and a good, solid place to live. It won't happen with this establishment there, and while it's there, breaking every rule that police and licensing put before it. So that's one of the reasons that I'm moving this. To change track for a moment, I thought, Speaker, that we had come to the point in this society, in this day and age, that we would give women who come forward to say that they've been sexually abused the benefit of the doubt. I've heard banter around this horseshoe today that leads me to believe that we have not reached those heights. It's a matter of pure respect. I'm not trying to intercede myself into the jokes that I've heard around the table, but I'm speaking directly to what was said while the microphones were on and speeches were being made. I think that some of the men in this council haven't understood that the women who are coming forward to say that they've been abused, to say that they've been ill-treated, may have a case. They need the benefit of the doubt. And in closing, Speaker, I want to say that I commend Tracy Cook for the words that she used about this particular incident when she was questioned on it.
Thank you. Councillor Pasternak.
Yeah, just very briefly, because I don't want to repeat what my colleagues said, but certainly in the inner suburbs, this is growing into a serious neighborhood problem with the regulation of holistic locations, body rub parlors, the clientele that it attracts, the reputation it gives to a neighborhood, the proximity to local schools. And I am deeply relieved that we are finally drilling down and trying to find a regulatory framework that works to to make sure that, that our citizens are protected, our children are protected, women are protected, and that we have a roadmap going forward to make sure these cannot continue to pop up in our local neighborhoods. I don't think there's any secret that the approval and licensing process has been abused, that they're giving unscrupulous operators the ability to set up shop, and that we've been allowing them to do it through the existing rules that we have now. I am most encouraged by the questions to staff that there is a real push now to make sure that these unscrupulous operators are shut down, that our children, our neighborhoods remain safe, and that we can put in a framework that rewards ethical operators and shuts down the unethical, unscrupulous operators. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Wong-Tam.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I have two motions, if you can ask the clerks to put them on the screen. The first motion is to refer the entire matter back to staff, to have staff carry out the work that's in their work plan, so it doesn't disrupt the work at all, because that's what they said that they were going to do. But the investigations and so forth that will be taking place is to have them report back on July 2018 with any particular status of that investigation. I don't need to know the end results. I just need to know, has it begun? And are you doing it? The second motion is just to amend the stakeholder working group that Councillor Kerry Giannis moved in his motion, and to add a few more folks who I believe their organization could add a different perspective to what is happening. Madam Speaker, if I may, I'm a little bit troubled by the comments from staff. And I'm troubled because it made it sound like that there were no conversations that took place with respect to the reports around sexual harassment and sexual misconduct and aggressive enforcement to the point of harassment by bylaw enforcement officers. The staff made it sound like she hadn't heard. But let me just tell you, Madam Speaker, these are the things that I do know. On May the 3rd, it was made known to me that something was happening in this particular sector. There were a number of individuals who said that they had been on the receiving end of sexual misconduct and sexual harassment by bylaw officers. On May the 6th, 3 days later, I went to Tracy Cook and I told her, Tracy, this is what I've heard. I need you to be aware that I'm going to convene a meeting to bring these practitioners together, and they would like to speak with you. She was not available on May the 16th, but she did send 3 staff persons in her place. Rod Joan, who's in head of enforcement, Vanessa Fletcher, Carlton Grant. All 3 of those MLF staff persons sat in that room and heard from the people who had raised these concerns. On April the 10th, 10 deputants appeared before the Licensing and Standards Committee, and they basically reinforced what they said in private to 3 MLS staff persons. On May the 11th, there was an interview conducted on City News, where the executive director of MLS said that the city has launched an investigation as a result of the complaints brought forward. The concerns raised through the deputations yesterday will be investigated in a statement. We have met with and will continue to meet with some of the groups that spoke yesterday to get their feedback and hear their concerns. The city takes complaints of staff misconduct very seriously and have mechanisms in place to investigation once they are received. City staff are expected to conduct themselves professionally at all times. I have 2 subsequent meetings now booked on May the 7th and May the 15th. Those meetings I am convening to bring those practitioners back into the room to speak to staff again so that they can continue to do this work. Madam Speaker, why am I, for the love of God, being asked to do this work when I believe this work should be done by staff? Now, I recognize that there may be all sorts of judgment and perhaps some really legitimate lived experiences in various communities about different centers. We're not talking about all the centers. I'm asking the staff to continue to do the work. What I am really troubled by is the fact that there are serious allegations around racial targeting, racial harassment brought forward by a number of legal clinics who have actually taken upon them and their body of work to now go and defend these particular practitioners. These are legal clinics that have sophisticated lawyers working on their behalf. They're legal clinics that actually do work around advocacy and human rights, and they've all written correspondence and said what is happening needs investigation. They've all recommended, every single one of these legal clinics have recommended, do not adopt the recommendations in the staff report. Something is not right. If you march ahead and suspend these licenses without completing or even initiating a formal investigation, you are saying to these communities, your complaints dismissed. Your lived experience doesn't matter. If you've been sexually harassed, if there's been any sexual misconduct, any misconduct at all by our staff, doesn't matter. Because we believe, absolutely believe, and trust the integrity of our staff because we know that they're good. I'm not saying they're not good, Madam Speaker. I'm saying that due process is warranted here.
Thank you, Councillor Wong Tam. Now we have a referral motion. So if anybody wants to speak on the referral, please put your name up. Request to question. Request to question staff. We're speaking on the referral right now. 2 minutes. 2 minutes? Yes. 2 minutes.
I'm not questioning anyone, Speaker. I'm just speaking. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Yeah, you said request a question. Oh, I'm under the request
Yeah.
staff column.
That's what I meant.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Fletcher, 2 minutes.
I am just going to urge Council to support the referral and to allow this process and to allow that number of people who have been in contact with my office from my community in the South Asian community to, as a group or members of different associations, at least meet with our staff before we proceed in this way. And I know Councillor Wong Tam feels very strongly about this. I also do, and I've heard from many people in my community. So without saying right or wrong, or anybody did or didn't do anything, and I want to be clear that in supporting the referral, I'm certainly not insinuating that anything was wrong. I want to be very clear on that. And I'm not sure that was clear enough earlier. All I want to do is have that conversation, facilitated, ongoing conversation, before we do something and then we're locked in loggerheads, or somebody's gone to the ombudsman, or something else has happened. I don't think it's worth doing it in that way. I think we can have an elegant approach here where it's referred, there's a conversation, and we get a report back from that conversation. People may have be misinformed, misheard. There may be language differences, and I just want to say, Councillor Shan, ask the Ombudsman, aren't there times when we have an issue around language, perhaps, when we're dealing with staff or staff are dealing with people? And she said yes, and he said, how would we be able to get people's information and get them good information? So I just think it's helpful for us.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher.
Do it in a slow, deliberate way.
Councillor de Bearmaker, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will not be supporting the referral, and I'm quite stunned actually that Councillor Wong Tam would move this motion. This flies in the face of everything that our staff have told us. It flies in the face of everything that we heard at the meeting. I was at the May 10th meeting where there was an urban myth that the problematic groups that were committing 98% or responsible for 98% of all charges, not the whole industry, not certain sections of the industry, but 5 specific associations that have had 98% of all the charges, 97% of all convictions. This small group of, I'll call them bad apples, or people convicted of violations of our bylaws, our staff just simply said, as we do this review, we're not going to renew their license because the Auditor General has found them in violation, we have found them in violation, we have convicted them, and we had a number of deputants come forward and say, well, you know, we've heard of sexual assault and we've heard stories of your officers threatening women and frightening women, doing all sorts of things. I asked each deputant, can you give us one example, one real example, date, time, location? Give us an example. You don't even have to give it to me. Go to our staff. And you know what? There's not one single real example. And if Councillor Wong Tam knows of somebody who has been sexually assaulted by anybody, she and I have a moral obligation to report that to the police immediately and to our staff immediately. And yet, I'm not aware, from Councillor Wong Tam's comments to us earlier today, that there has been anyone making that accusation. I'm not aware of it. Maybe they're out there, but so far at that committee, absolutely not one person. It was an urban legend where people said, well, we've been convicted 98% of the time, and now, again, we're going to strike back with this.
Thank you,
so
Councillor De
let's move forward.
Thank you. Councillor Burnside, 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. I actually support investigating and dealing appropriately with wrongdoing on the part of our staff. I went over and confirmed that that's what we're doing. This is a classic, hey, look over there. Okay? We've dithered long enough on this. This is about body rubs and supposed holistic centers operating like the Wild West. Okay? Working after hours, advertising sex, whatever it is. My bigger concern is actually human trafficking. So absolutely we need to be concerned with racism and wrongdoing, but we need to be concerned about human trafficking. And we know the human trafficking goes on in these supposed holistic centers, of which we have 27 associations, I believe. It's a joke. They're making a joke of us. The bigger concern is we're affecting people's lives. People's lives are being ruined, and we want to dither some more. What Councillor Wong Tam didn't tell you, and maybe it was an oversight, but I actually asked 2 people that were there on behalf of the holistic centers who were concerned about harassment. I asked them, well, what is an holistic center? Crickets. That's what I got, crickets. No answer. They couldn't even tell me what a holistic center was. They supposedly operate one. They couldn't tell me what one was.
Thank you. Councillor Palacio, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will not support the referral. As chair of the committee, we've been dealing with this for a number of years, and we had, over the years, hundreds of deputants before the committee. And as an immigrant myself, let me tell you, the general complaint was whenever there was some sort of regulation to be imposed on the industry, the complaint was, you know what, we didn't understand the procedures, we didn't understand the language, we didn't understand what was being said. So the Auditor General was very clear in November of last year.
Alarm is going off.
Pardon?
Somebody's alarm clock is going off.
Okay.
Whose alarm?
My time, please.
I don't know. Okay, go ahead.
My time, if you can please adjust.
Sorry, Councillor.
Yeah. As you may recall, the Auditor General is in November, I believe it was November 2017, she was very specific in terms of the proposed licensing bylaws, and the purpose of the bylaws is to protect public safety and consumer protection enforcement of, especially when it comes to public nuisances. And the Auditor General was very specific in terms of implementing, asking city staff from municipal licensing to implement those recommendations. And that's exactly what they are doing. They have a work plan before us that needs to be implemented. So this referral, simply what we'll do is we'll send us back once again to square one when consultations have been done. So all this notion that we haven't listened carefully to those who have complained, and Deputy Mayor De Vermaker, he's absolutely right. We asked them, please tell us Have you ever received any complaints from anyone? No one was able to say a beep about whatever. So it's another excuse to send it back, and hopefully that nothing will happen. So going for the referral, it won't make justice to anyone.
I gave you a few extra seconds. Councillor Perks, 2 minutes.
So this has been a marvelous exercise to try to understand how power works in our society. There are 3 groups of people involved here: elected officials, enforcement staff, and people who work in holistic centers. A number of people in this council have stood up and said, we have to look after the vulnerable people. We, the powerful people, have to make decisions to benefit vulnerable people, for example, people who are being trafficked through holistic centers. Then some people from holistic centers, the actual vulnerable people, the one with the least power, come forward and say, there's a problem. In this, of the 3 groups of people, the least powerful one is the group of people in the holistic centers. So they say some people who have more power than us, enforcement officers, have been abusing us. And right now, some members of this council stand up and dismiss what they say. They say this is them striking back, or this is a classic look over there. That's exactly how we disempower people. When someone says, I'm having trouble with enforcement agency, and you go to government and your claims are not only not taken seriously, they're belittled and dismissed in a public place, that is how people lose faith in government and in our enforcement institutions. So what's the remedy here? What's the right thing to do to make sure that trust is built and we achieve the policy outcome that the members of the Licensing and Standards Committee and our staff are after? What's the right thing to do? To take 2 months. 2 months.
Thank you,
and
Councillor
sort it
Perks.
out. Weigh those things and understand how power works in our...
Thank you. Councillor Karygiannis.
Ever famous words, Madam Speaker. Call the question.
Okay, we're voting on the referral. Can we ring the bells? Okay, hold on, stop. Okay, Councillor Holliday, yes?
Madam Speaker, there's some confusion on the floor whether or not we're voting on calling the question or on the referral.
Oh, sorry, yes. We're voting on calling the question. Sorry, I apologize. I apologize. Yeah, we're voting on calling the question. I really apologize to staff and members of council. This is on calling the question.
The motion to call the question does not carry. The vote is 19 to 11. The required 2/3 majority has not been achieved.
Unbelievable. I thought everybody understood that we have to finish soon, that we don't have quorum here, and yes, there is. Councillor Hart, Councillor... Oh, on the referral, yes. Okay.
I think you should put the deputy in.
No. All in favor of the referral, recorded vote. We're voting on the referral now.
computer has now.
Okay, members of council, are we okay? Okay, the motion is on the screen to refer, recorded vote.
Councillor Karygiannis, please.
The referral does not carry. The vote is 12 to 18.
Okay, now Councillor Hart.
Thank you, Speaker. I'll be brief in the interest of time. I was tempted to support the referral because I've heard, but I didn't, because I've heard a number of issues. And I think when you hear that number of issues out there, I'm not going to say there are real issues in MLS and enforcement, but I'm not going to say there aren't either. And I think it certainly behooves, and I know Tracy will look into those issues, it behooves Tracy and the staff to turn over every stone to find out if anything is going on. And I know comments have been made about it being, look the other way and all those kinds of things. I don't believe that either. I mean, the complaints likely are coming from the areas where there's the greatest enforcement. That's probably what's happening. But it's also where those practitioners are the most vulnerable. Because they are offside perhaps with the law, that's where if there is somebody that is a rogue officer, that's where they can make things happen that are untoward. So I know Tracy will follow this up and the staff will follow this up, and I would be looking at those associations on the list that have the most infractions, and I'd be taking a look at it and see if that's where the issues are. I've got great confidence in the staff that they will follow up. They've heard from enough people today, and I'm sure that at the end of the day we'll find out if there are any issues or not. And right now, we honestly can't say there are. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Burnside to speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a motion. As I mentioned, Madam Speaker, my concern is really with the human trafficking angle, or that lens, if you will. In 2013, we directed staff to work with stakeholders and to address human trafficking issues. We're highlighted by the federal government and the Canadian Women's Foundation as leading the charge in this area, and yet here we are 5 years later, and we have nothing to show for it. We've heard how it's a complex issue, and I know we might be wringing our hands, but to me, that's not enough. We actually need results. We need to do something. Unfortunately, we won't have any information until 2019, but we need to get the proper people at the table to actually address this issue and start getting some results. I hope you can support my motions.
Thank you. Councillor de Beermaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would encourage all members of council to actually listen to the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking. That's why I was so stunned at the motion by Councillor Wong Tam. We had people from the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking say to us, as advocates trying to protect women who suffer violence and kidnapping and sexual assault, please do what your staff are telling you and freeze these 5 organizations until you do further investigations. That's what we should be doing. We're not going after all associations. There's 5 of them that have 98% of all charges. And when we were at committee, the world was turned upside down. One deputant came in and accused our staff of racism. And I said, well, why, on what grounds are you saying that our staff are racist? And he said, because I'm Chinese. And I said, well, okay, you're Chinese, but why is that racist? He said, well, because you're charging us and we're Chinese, so you're racist against Chinese people. And we said, but when you're convicted of a bylaw infraction, we don't care where you're from. It was a bizarre universe that day. Councillor Wong Tam and I and every member of this council has a moral obligation, if not a legal obligation, to say if a crime has been committed, if there's even an accusation, then that accusation should be documented. Date, time, location, description, person, anything to make sure that that perpetrator is held to account. But here I stand today. I offered my help to anyone who came forward. I suggested they go talk to any of the staff that they wished or to the police department. And to my knowledge today, not one human being has come forward with even an accusation. Not even, so, you know, these things have to be investigated. Not one. So if a person had come forward and said something, that would be different. But we have to look at what is our job. Our job as a licensing agency is saying, you're allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that. You're violating it. Not all the associations are violating it. We're not getting accusations from the entire industry. We're getting accusations made by a very small group of people, the very same group of people who are committing 98% of the violations, and a group of people who the Canadian Centre to Stop Human Trafficking has said to us, please help us protect women by doing what your staff are recommending. So, Madam Speaker, I would hope now that we've not referred this item, that we move forward with it to protect people. And again, I would encourage any councillor here who can document anything to bring it forward to staff, because to my knowledge, it hasn't been done till today. Not even today. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Palacio.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will strongly recommend members of council to support the following motions. That's from Councillor Karijanis, Councillor Aujimeri, and Burnside. I think these are great motions. The Auditor General was very specific, very clear when she brought her recommendations back in November 2017. And the specifications were very clear that municipal licensing standards, for them just to review them and to bring a report forward to City Council with a framework, with a work plan in terms of implementing it. And that's exactly what's before us. The illegal body wrap parlors that we have, especially within small plazas and commercial strips, within our residential neighborhoods, are becoming a huge, huge problem all throughout the city. When you have hundreds and perhaps thousands of these illegal businesses that are simply creating all kinds of nuisances, as we all know, excessive noise, drug dealing, and all other illegal activities. But the main thing is that some of them, when they were asked at the committee level, during the deputations, some of them are literally, they have gone underground. That's an industry that it doesn't pay any taxes, an industry that's putting a lot of pressure on city resources all throughout, and that's an industry that's creating huge public nuisances all throughout. So what city staff is doing is, through community consultation, once again, to bring forward something that's going to be workable, something that's going to make sense. One of the key recommendations that from Councillor Karijanis is the anti-human trafficking. That's an issue that's been brought back and has been spoken over and over again. And that has to do with public health and safety, including a review and some sort of asking to the province and also to the feds to look into the human trafficking aspect. So for those reasons, I will ask members of council please to support the recommendations from city staff and also the recommendations put forward by my colleagues. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Okay, let's vote. Are we voting in numeric order? Okay. 1A by Councillor Karygiannis? Yes, we will. We have to put it on the screen. It's the green sheets. Everybody has them. There it is on the screen. The underlined portion is what he's amending. All in favor? Carried. Okay. Second one is motion 1B revised by Councillor Karygiannis. Okay, we'll have a recorded vote on this one, 1B. Well, that's why I said, Councillor Wong Tam, you asked for a recorded vote.
Councillor DeGiorgio, please.
The amendment carries unanimously, 27 in favor.
Okay, motion 2 by Councillor Al-Jamari. Do we need a recorded vote? All in favor? Carried. Motion 4 by Councillor Burnside. Oh, sorry, motion 3B by Councillor Kristen Wong Tam. Recorded vote.
Councillor Davis, Councillor Karygiannis, and Councillor Perruzza, please.
The motion carries unanimously, 27 in favor.
Motion 4 by Councillor Burnside. All in favor? Carried. Item is amended. Recorded vote.
Councillor McMahon, please. Councillor Bailao. Thank you.
Councillor Mihevc, please. Councillor Palacio, please.
The item is amended, carries 23 to 4.
Okay. We're just going to go back and try to resolve the issue with Councillor DeGiorgio on his item. I believe that Councillor DeGiorgio has revised motion 1B. And I think that we have everyone as a copy of it. We have 1A, 1B. So let's vote on 1A first. Pardon? No, we already went through that, please. On 1A first. Oh, Councillor DeGiorgio already spoke.
I just want to say that 1B was revised in consultation with the legal staff and the planning staff, and it was to their satisfaction, so thank you.
Okay, 1A, recorded vote.
Councillor Wong Tam, please. Councillor Doucette, please.
Okay.
Councillor Fletcher, when you're seated, please. Thank you.
Motion 1A carries 27 to 1.
1B, recorded vote. Well, I spoke to the solicitor on that one, so. 1B, recorded vote. Oh, come on. Mary. Okay, it's on the screen. Recorded vote. Okay, maybe we don't. We can't do a recorded vote. So in favor? Carried. Because there's something wrong with the item as amended. On favor? Carried. Please take your seats. We still have, we're at our next item, page 4, LS 20. Please. Page 4, LS 24.3, payday loans. Okay, we're at that item. Councillor Campbell held the item down. Do we have questions to staff? Councillor Campbell, questions to staff. We have 2 items left.
So I'll be really quick because I had an opportunity to talk about this with Councillor Palacio earlier. I'm a little so this has come before us without a lot of consultation. It says there was only 1 consultation that was held, and I mean, how many people attended that consultation?
I attended that consultation with my staff, and we had 6 representatives, 2 of which were representing the association.
So it's fair to say that consumers were not really, with the drafting of this report and these new regulations, consumers, people that use these payday loan companies or financial companies, whatever you want to call them, we didn't really talk to consumers.
We did not talk to consumers. However, over the last 2 years, there's been extensive consultation with the provinces. They've been looking at this legislation. We also did a survey amongst residents in the City of Toronto last year, and we also promoted the survey done by the province. So we did extensive outreach a year and a half ago, but this piece is reacting to getting the authority to move forward with this in January.
So, all right, tell me a little bit about the survey that you did, because that's not referred to in the report. So the survey, I mean, how many people responded to the survey and what were they saying?
It's on page 9 in the report, and I believe there were over 300 respondents to that survey.
Okay. And that survey was done when?
In the summer of 2017.
Oh, okay. So it's recent information. Okay. Sorry, I didn't look at it. Now, but this is a provincially regulated industry, isn't it not?
That's correct. But in January of this year, they gave authority for municipalities across Ontario to limit the number and distance of payday loan establishments.
But we don't limit the number and area where body rub parlors, not the licensed ones, but the holistic places. We don't limit that, do we?
Through you, Madam Speaker, yes, we do have an express authority in the City of Toronto Act to restrict the number of licenses issued to adult entertainment establishments, of which body rub parlors are. They are capped at 25 and have been since 1975.
I know that. We had that conversation. So we had that conversation. I knew that. But the holistic centers, which we just spent all that time debating, we've never had a discussion about a certain number per ward or, you know, how bad they are, and so we better limit the number. We haven't done that, but we're doing that here.
So, through you, Madam Speaker, again, the authority for us to restrict the number of licenses is expressly stated in the City of Toronto Act. It applies to the taxi industry, it applies to the adult entertainment industry, and the province enacted it to allow us to restrict and limit the number on payday lenders explicitly. Other than that, licenses are not a restricted issuance.
So how did this, so I know we did the survey, you've heard from councillors, there's probably been some political pressure, but is this a staff initiative? Did this come about just because of the changing of the legislation, or did staff take it, licensing staff take it upon themselves to raise this issue?
No, thank you. Through you, Madam Speaker. Actually, sir, the request for us to look at this dates back to approximately 2010 when Councillor Nunziata raised the issue about the concern of proliferation of these types of establishments and the impact it may have on the vulnerable populations and others that are finding themselves having to use these services. There are legitimate users of the services, and we recognize that, which is also why the province does not allow municipalities to ban their existence. But we needed to find a way, and we were asked to find a way that was coupled with an additional motion we had, I believe, 2 years ago, again, to look at this and consider the impacts it's having. Once we receive the authority through the City of Toronto Act explicitly to limit it, we've exercised that authority. Similarly to other sister jurisdictions such as Hamilton and others are looking at the same thing.
Okay, so I want to take a moment and just talk about Ms. Cook. There's a line in the report that refers to the annual percentage rate of a loan. But if you were to borrow $1,000, and it says the average borrowing is around $500, and people borrow 6 times a year, I know that. But if you were to borrow $1,000 and you were to not repay it, would you be responsible for repaying $4,900? Because so what you've done is you've taken the time frame. So the way it was explained to me is that, well, the way it is, so if you borrow $100, you owe $15 within 2 weeks, and you've taken that and extrapolated. But the reality is that if somebody were to borrow $1,000 for a year, they're not repaying $4,900, are they?
Oh, through you, Madam Speaker. So, sir, that's as a result of the magic of compounding interest, the quoted rate versus the actual rate that occurs. And in this case, the interest is compounded biweekly. That's where we calculate an annual percentage rate actually of 390%.
Okay, members of council. Now, members of council, Councillor Robinson, we still have an item from Public Works that is still outstanding. Okay, I just want to tell members of council, if you're planning on leaving, please tell us, because we're at minimum quorum here. Okay, so we'll go to the speakers. Councillor Palacio to speak first. He's the chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 2 motions that I'd like to move. If the clerk can please display them. So the first motion literally is city staff in the report. They're recommending to cap the number of establishments citywide, and my motion is changing that to cap the number of these establishments per ward instead. So the danger to it, that's the first one. And the second motion, B, is asking well, there you have it. And I'll speak to it. So first, Madam Speaker, I want to thank you for bringing a notice of motion back in 2010 with regards to these establishments that by then we didn't have that many. There were just a few in the City of Toronto. And as the time went by, now we know what we have. So then the purpose of my motion is the first one. A is the way it is, we have a number of neighborhood improvements within the city of Toronto. And within those communities, you have bingo halls and you name it. So there is a high concentration of these establishments that are moving there, and that's creating a tremendous problem to the most vulnerable people in society. The other one, the next motion, number B, is literally speaking, is to bring another report back, but this time to do in consultation and also in partnership with city planning, the Social Development Finance and Administration, and with, and of course with the municipal licensing and standards, and to identify the 31 neighborhood improvement areas and how those areas are being affected with. In my opinion, this is a real crime what's happening there. Is the worst loan sharking ever seen. These financial establishments prey on the most vulnerable people out there in society, on the poor, on the most disadvantaged. And that's factual information. They prey on those who cannot open up a checking account because of their personal circumstances, either because their immigration status doesn't allow them, either they are undocumented workers, people that who are refugees, people who are getting paid by unscrupulous employers, and they are getting victimized in terms of being exploited. As a result, the way it is, the system that we have is nothing more than a highway robbery. And there is something fundamentally wrong, my friends, when you see that at the end, when people have to pay about 390% of their annual income to these institutions, there is something wrong. Why do I say 390%? Because most of these people, they go over and over. Every month, they go back to the same institution because they have nowhere else to go. So to the recommendations within the report that's before us, I think those are sensible recommendations, and these are recommendations that should be adopted, and I'm hoping that is going to be a unanimous vote. And I want to thank you once again, Councilor Nuciara, for bringing this forward. It was 8 years ago, but eventually we're getting there. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Councillor Palacio. I have next to speak Councillor Wong Tam, if she's here. We're on interim regulations for payday loan establishments and consultation plan, but next on the list is Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have a motion that City Council amend Licensing and Standards Committee Recommendation 1 by adding the following new part: despite the permission of license holders to change locations in Part 1H, no license holder may relocate on or within 500 meters of the known address as 555 Rexdale Boulevard as of April 20th, 2018. And it goes on. This has been advanced circulated since Tuesday. I think it speaks for itself. I don't think it's appropriate that we license legal loan sharking payday loan outlets beside the casino. What you'll have is very desperate people on a losing streak going out and entering into a debt that will just drive them deeper and deeper. If you listened to the general manager's last answer to Councillor Campbell, it in fact showed that the rates of interest are just far beyond anything in any reasonable realm or any reputable financial institution. I think that by doing this very simple thing, we may be saving many, many families that are already struggling with gambling addiction from unnecessary hardship. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. I have two speakers left on the list, Councillor Wong Tam and Councillor Nunziata. If Councillor Wong Tam is here, she's first on the list to speak. And if she's not here just at this minute, Councillor Nunziata would be the next up to speak. Councillor Nunziata, you have 5 minutes to speak. And please respect the rulings of the Deputy Speaker.
I don't have the report in front of me. Okay, thank you. I'll be brief because I don't want to run out of quorum. So I'm urging members of council to support the recommendations that came through licensing, and I've moved a bunch of motions at licensing as well. But this issue goes on. It was a request that I made through licensing, how many years ago?
2010.
2010, 8 years ago. In my ward in particular, and Councillor Wong Tam actually came to one of the meetings that we had with Acorn, actually sponsored a meeting in my ward. Because of the number of payday loans that we had, in particular in Weston. Along Weston Road, I have approximately 20 payday loans. On Jane Street, I probably have another 10. Every block, there's a payday loan. And they're in areas where we have Toronto housing and the most vulnerable in areas. And to have 10 in one block, it's very concerning to the community. We, for one, we're trying to revitalize our community. We're a neighborhood improvement area, and we're trying to improve the retail strip that we have, but we have so many payday loans. And the problem with the payday loans as well is, other than the issues that it's been brought up as far as the interest and other issues, there's crime issues as well. And the ones that I have in my ward, I had a shooting a couple months ago in one of the payday loans, and a woman with a child was shot, but fortunately it was just clipped. So she's okay. She was taken to the hospital. Some of the payday loans I have in my ward also buy and sell gold. So what's happening in my community, that people have their houses broken into during the day or in the evening. They're stealing all the gold, and they're going to the local payday loans where they buy and sell gold and selling the gold that they've stolen from these residents. And that's happening. For me personally, I had my house broken into about 5 years ago, and I was told by the police officer, go down the street to Weston Road, you'll probably find your jewelry. This is what's happening in these communities and with these payday loans. And last year, I think it was last year, I was asked by the city manager, Peter Wallace, to make a deputation to the province, because the province was receiving deputations from different groups because we did ask the province to amend legislation and to regulate, so that it gives the municipality the authority to regulate the payday loans. So I made a deputation on behalf of City Council and asked the province to amend the legislation, and they did this year. And I believe it's the City of Hamilton that actually adopted the recommendations from the province. And so now we have the authority to regulate, and that is why it's so important to support the recommendations that we passed at licensing, because we have been fighting and lobbying the provincial government to allow the municipality the authority. And now we have the authority, and we have to take the recommendation and move with it. I'm sure that maybe other members of council in Etobicoke don't have them. I don't know, Councillor Campbell. Maybe you don't have any in your ward. I don't know, but we do. We do. And we have these problems. And I know that a lot of downtown councillors as well. Councillor Ford, you have them. We all have them. And it's like the dispensaries. I have dispensaries as well that I can't close down. And we've raided them 5 times. We still can't close them down. But I urge members of council to take this issue very, very seriously, support the recommendations that it's in licensing, and any other recommendations. Councillor Layton, you moved an amendment as well. Any other amendments that come through, please support them. We need your help, and we need to clean up the proliferation of payday loans. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nunziata. We have Councillor Wong Tam down as our last speaker. I've asked the clerk if she had any motions to move. They are not aware of any. So if Councillor Wong Tam is nearby, she can come and be the last speaker. If not, we'll switch up and go to motions.
One A by Councillor Palacio. All in favor? Carried. 1B by Councillor Palacio. All in favor? Carried. Motion 2 by Councillor Layton. All in favor? Carried. Item is amended. Recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, Councillor DeGiorgio, please.
The item is amended, carries 25 to 1.
Our last item is on page 4. PW 28.11 revised free-floating car share pilot. Councillor Fragadakis, you held the item down. Do you have questions?
Okay, thank you, Madam Speaker. So through you, sorry if I could just have some quiet. So the TPA allows permit parking holders to park for free overnight in some of their lots. Is that correct?
That is correct, Councillor.
Thank you. Cars with this new free-floating permit then would be able to park for free overnight in those lots, correct?
No, that would not be a term of this type of permit, Councillor.
So okay. Short-term car rental companies have been in operation for a number of years now in Toronto. The 2009 report says they have been around for years. Your report says this service will decrease car ownership, yet I've not seen any decrease in the demand for permit parking in my ward. In fact, I would submit to you that it has increased over the years. So I was wondering, is there any part of the city that has experienced a decrease in the demand for permit parking, or has in fact the demand for permit parking increased in other wards? Go ahead.
Through you, Speaker, the evaluations that have been done with car share companies operating in the City of Toronto with the standard type of car share companies have found that multiple users, up from 9 to 11 users, are using each car. So it is replacing.
I don't think you've understood my question. My question is there any part of the city that has experienced a decrease in the demand for permit parking?
I'm sorry, I don't know that, Councillor.
So perhaps somebody can come from permit parking to answer my questions. And
through you, Madam Speaker, we will get staff here.
Okay. So you've said that this will decrease car ownership in the city, and I was wondering how much of a permit parking demand decrease do you expect after 1 year of this program?
Through you, I also don't have the answer to that question. The information that we received was a multi-year study that was done out of Berkeley, California, about the percentage reduction of a relatively large sample size of users of car share, and what the results of that were a 2 to 5% number of members that gave up their vehicle, and then 7 to 10% have forgone the purchase of a vehicle. So that's what we base our information on, related to the decrease in users, as well as what Jacqueline mentioned with regard to multiple users of individual cars.
So anecdotally, could you tell us if what you expect the decrease to be?
For permit parking?
Yes.
I don't know that there will be necessarily a decrease in demand for permit parking. I think we are looking to get our staff up here to see if they can answer that question more specifically. Okay. But I think, as we know, as the city continues to intensify and densify, we're adding more demand. Okay. And so hopefully we have the ability to weigh out that demand with giving a new service, which is this free-floating car share service.
So on page 9 of your report, it says that for the purposes of this, 950-510C, 6 in brackets, clustering will be defined as more than one car share vehicle from the same car share company being parked on the same city street block for any length of time. I was wondering, what's the definition of a city street block?
It's intersection to intersection. Intersection to intersection.
Okay. So I did a quick review and an estimate that there are about 1,000 city street blocks in my ward. So if half of them have permit parking, and since your rules is per company, all of the 500 cars of each of the 4 companies could actually be parked in my ward, and it would not be considered clustering, correct?
If there were multiple, via more than one of individual companies, it would not be considered clustering.
Oh, thank you. Mm-hmm. So how are you going to enforce the clustering provision, or will we just have to be writing more tickets?
Through you, Speaker, the Car2Go is the one company currently that operates free-floating in the city. They have a team. Right now it's about 25 people who get called out on a complaint basis to move their cars so that they can eliminate the clustering. I also think that residents call enforcement directly, so there certainly are some tickets that are issued for car share companies.
So has this pilot project been included in the presentation to the public on the overnight on-street permit parking consultation in Toronto and East York?
The one that's just happening now?
Yes, the one that just happened on Monday, the 23rd of April at the East York Civic Centre.
Through you, I apologize, Councillor. If we can get permit parking staff down here, I can answer that question more completely. Okay. I don't know how it's been addressed.
All right, so if this goes through, should we put that, so I'll hold that question because that relates to this. Sorry, Madam Speaker, I can't hear myself.
Okay, can you please try to keep it down?
So my next question is, how much does the TPA get in revenue from car share companies? On a yearly basis?
We're finding that answer.
Okay, hold my time, please.
Annually, $720,000 in revenue.
So has that been decreasing or increasing lately?
We don't know if that has trended down. This is based on information that TPA has recently given us.
Okay, so in your discussions with the TPA, did they have any concerns about this, and did you discuss other alternatives like a program involving pay and display parking?
Through the Speaker, the car share companies do pay for pay and display parking and for the lots that they use on a use basis.
Okay. So is it true that in Chicago, the deal between the city and short-term car rental services is that certain wards are excluded from free-floating parking provisions?
Through you, we don't have information about Chicago's program at that level of specificity.
Okay.
Okay, that was your last question.
Okay.
Councillor Doucette.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've been waiting for this day for a long time. I think this is brilliant. The maps you gave us, attachments 7, 8, and 9. Could you just explain why these boundaries are shown? For instance, in my ward, you've taken one side of Jane Street but not the other, and I do have permitted streets on the other side. So could you explain why these maps are before us?
Yes, Councillor. Through the Speaker, attachment 7, 8, and 9, there's a boundary of white that indicates for illustrative purposes the existing operating area of Car2Go in the City of Toronto. If you refer to the attachments in the supplementary report 3, 4, and 5, right, that's described in more detail.
Yeah, it's just a little hard to see and not in colour, but anyway. Okay, so that's what one company has right now. My understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, this free-floating permit would be for areas only on streets which right now have permit parking. Is that correct?
Through you, Speaker, that is correct.
So on attachment 4, you have permit parking availability and allocation by ward. You have 27 wards listed on attachment 4, telling us how many spaces we've got now. Only those 27 wards will be affected by this free flow because they can only park on streets which are permitted. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, I think that clears up quite a bit from our last conversation in this chamber. I think councillors were a bit confused about who could. Now, just going back to your maps, this is one company right now. We are offering this permit to up to 4 companies at 500 permits per company for a maximum of 2,000. Not all companies actually have 500 cars right now. This map could change, but it can only change to reflect what you've got on attachment 4.
That's correct.
All right. One of the things I'm hearing from residents now, since one of these companies went free for all, is clustering. I have streets where they may leave 5 to 7 cars on one street. How will this pilot project save my residents from having to park on another street where it's street specific and therefore they're getting tickets?
So through you, right now we don't have a permit situation for free-floating car share. We can impose terms and conditions through a permit. Right now the existing company Car2Go actually has rebalancing teams that they send out. Whether that number is adequate to get throughout the entire service area is a question, and I certainly think it's something we can address with individual companies when they come in for their permitting. And then there's also enforcement, although we all know that enforcement they have a lot of impacts on their time and attention.
Do you feel that during the pilot project, the companies who are getting these permits will probably be very good at removing their cars when they're clustering because they actually want this pilot project to continue?
Through you, I would think that would be the case, that they would want the ability to have a free-floating car share permit in the City of Toronto. That would be something that they would want and desire, and so they would, and we would have a mechanism by which, as you know, we could revoke those permits if they weren't meeting that permitted condition.
One of my concerns since day one was allowing these free-flowing permits on every permit street. I have 7 streets, I think it is actually, which have waiting lists. And I felt that it wouldn't be fair to bring in another company, any company, who would then bump a resident who has a permit right now. So can you explain to me what your report is suggesting on streets which are either wait-listed, 95% or 90%? Where are you coming at with that? And this is, I mean, I support that, but where are we coming at?
So the staff recommendation that we've had since the first time we came to council with this report was that we would exclude from the permit locations that were at 110 capacity or wait-listed capacity for free-floating car share. Or 100% if it was a street-specific. So there's zone-specific and street-specific, so 100%. Through this process, we had been asked to look at what the impacts would be if we restricted those streets where there was 95% capacity. And so we've created a proposal or a map related to that. We know that the number of car share permits or the number of parking spots would be decreased. With our proposal, it's 7,700 parking spaces would be excluded based on those waitlisted streets at this time. With the 95% capacity, it would be 9,900. And then I believe you asked us to look at coming back on a 6-month time frame, and that's something else that we have added to this proposal, that we would revisit those wait lists and that capacity at a 6-month time frame because the numbers will change.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to have a quorum call because we don't have quorum. Please, members, you need to stay in your seats because we barely have quorum here. I don't even know if we have enough.
Councillor de Bearmaker, please.
Councillor Layton.
Councillor Ford, please.
Councillor Davis, please.
Madam Speaker, there are 24 members in the chamber.
Okay, we need everyone to stay in their seats. Councillor Layton, unless we want to defer this item. Councillor Layton?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So the original recommendation was for 110 areas permitted to 110% because it was waitlisted.
Through you, Madam Speaker, and those that were street-specific were at 100%.
Okay. Then you've also produced 95%?
Yes.
And 90.
Correct.
So at 95%, how much of the area are we removing?
We are eliminating 9,900 and parking spots total across the area with 95% capacity.
Is that compared to 100 the waitlisted areas, or to the
so we're effectively eliminating an additional 2,200 spaces. Between the waitlisted streets is 7,700 spaces that would be excluded, and then if we went to 95%, it would be 9,900 spaces excluded.
And to 90%?
And to 90%, it would be 17,000 spaces excluded.
So it almost doubles from 95 to 90%.
Correct.
How viable is it that at 110%, how viable is this as a pilot?
We did a fair amount of research and looping in with companies and also examination of our permit parking system to come up with that waitlisted capacity. We think the pilot would give us good information about how to integrate a long-term program, and so that is why it's our recommendation.
And at 95%, how viable is the pilot project?
We believe that we can run a viable program at 95%, that we would still get, although it would certainly exclude more spaces, we would still get information about the pilot program that would be beneficial in developing a long-term proposal for free-floating car share in the city.
So let me ask you another question. How viable do you think it is at 90%?
We believe that 90% is going to be very challenging to be able to navigate because the number of spaces that on street that would be available for free-floating car share, the number of exclusions would be quite significant, and so we did not recommend 90%.
Thank you. Now there's evidence to suggest a couple of things that are listed out in the report that seem like they meet with some of the other principles or goals of the city. One is reducing vehicle ownership.
Correct.
The data shows that car shares eliminate how many?
About 2 to 5%. In 2015, there was a pretty comprehensive study done out of Berkeley, and about 2 to 5% of active members gave up their vehicle, and then 7 to 10% have foregone the purchase of a vehicle.
7 to 10% gave up the purchase of a vehicle.
Yeah, they did not add another vehicle to their family.
Now, there's also something around transportation cost that you list in your report.
Yes.
This reduces cost to residents of Toronto.
That's correct. So the benefits include a reduction of household transportation costs, a reduction overall of vehicle kilometers traveled, which I think is in line with our greenhouse gas and emissions interest in having that be less in the city. That indicated that each car share vehicle resulted in about 29,000 fewer vehicle kilometers traveled annually.
So let's think about that for a second. So every car share vehicle is 29,000 fewer vehicle kilometers traveled. That you're a transportation department. Is that good or bad for congestion?
That supports our goals for congestion reduction.
So if each vehicle did that on an annual basis, and how many vehicles, we're talking about 500 vehicles per company.
Up to 4 companies.
Up to 4 companies. There's really only 2 companies that use this method, at least that I'm familiar with. So let's say 1,000 cars, those 1,000 cars could potentially reduce by 29 million kilometers hours per year.
think your math is correct.
And let's just highlight this one point once again, because there was some confusion at the last meeting about this, and we've clarified it in the more recent report. This will only apply to currently permitted streets.
Correct.
So while a vehicle may park for a short duration on a non-permitted street like anyone can,
right,
it would have to return to a permitted street overnight, for instance, or durations longer than 3 hours, 1 hour, whatever the parking restriction was.
Correct. The companies would be required to create a geofence in their system that would not allow somebody to end a trip in a non-permitted space.
Just like right now, they don't let you end a trip when you travel north of Eglinton.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Okay, just one sec, okay?
I'd like to move that leave be granted to introduce bills 530 and 531.
Okay, shall leave be granted to introduce these bills, recorded vote? We're doing the bills.
We'll do a confirming.
Well, I just have a funny feeling because like people are walking out and we may not have quorum to complete the last item.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor Layton. Councillor Davis.
The motion to introduce the bills carries 24-1.
Shall these bills be passed and declared as a bylaw, recorded vote?
We don't have any. Everybody was here over the course of the day.
Councillor Perks, please. Councillor Matlow, Councillor Davis, Councillor Perruzza, Councillor Layton. Madam Speaker, please.
Councillor Campbell, please. Councillor Mahavik and Councillor Campbell, please.
The motion to enact the bills carries 23-2.
Councillor Ford, you have a motion to introduce the confirming bill.
Yes, Madam Speaker, that leave be granted to introduce a bill to confirm to the point in the introduction of this motion the proceedings of City Council meeting 39 on April 24th, 25th, 26th, and 27th, 2018.
Thank you. Shall leave be granted to introduce this bill, recorded vote?
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor McMahon, Councillor Layton, Councillor Davis, Councillor Matlow.
The motion to introduce the confirming bill carries 24-1.
Shall this bill be passed and declared as a bylaw, recorded vote? Well, Now, we just have this last item. We don't have four.
Councillor McMahon, please. Councillor Layton, Councillor Davis, Councillor Matlow. Councillor Bailao, please, and thank you. Councillor Matlow, please. Councillor McMahon, please. Councillor Perks, please.
Councillor Mahavik, please.
The motion to enact the confirming bill carries 24-2.
Okay. Continue on our last item. Still questions? Councillor Matlow.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The how do we when we have permit streets and whatever percentage it might be, Vince, in our case, has an inventory. And people lawfully pay their fees to purchase a product, which is the ability to be able to park legally in the street. How do we assure that inventory if we have such a variable? When we don't know for certain if we can deliver that product, right, that people are paying for. So they don't know if there's going to be 1 or 5. Like, they just don't know how many car-to-go cars might be on that street. So just for the principle of it, how do we assure that the inventory will be steady and assured?
Through you, Madam Speaker, so the question is, how do we guarantee the person who has that permit will still have accessibility on their street? And I think that's the reason why we've been asked to look at a reduction so that there's still capacity. So there would still be the ability to get new permits, but for existing permit holders, the rules would still apply to them. And if, because the car share permits would not be additive to existing permit parking permits, they would be basically removed from the system. Correct? So those two, no, do you want to answer that differently?
I didn't understand. Is that correct?
It was, through the Speaker, it was correct until the point about removed from the system, because permits are otherwise on a street-by-street or zone-by-zone basis. These would be free-floating for all zones and all streets with applicable permit parking. So the idea would be that they would be in addition to the 72,000 existing permit parking.
Okay, so that's correct.
So you're correct.
My colleague is correct.
No, thank you. That was clear. So that, if you could just help me understand that then, and I'll just kind of repeat that I think it's important that my colleagues understand this, because this is my principal concern, and this question has not been resolved. Like, I like the idea of car share. That's not my concern. What I'm concerned about is that if people are paying their fees and they believe that they pay their fee, they have a product which is the assurance of a space in their street, assuming that their neighbors aren't parking oddly or what have you, how can we continue to assure that? Or have you thought about that? If there's a free-floating system where a private company essentially can come and take over that spot?
Through the Speaker, if Council has the issue of the sort of guarantee of a space on their street or zone as a key concern, then perhaps the supplementary report policy and bylaws around a 95% cap on where the free-floating car share vehicles are able to park, maybe that would meet Council's needs in that regard. Because that would only allow the free-floating car share vehicles to park on streets that have at least a 5% capacity in our system.
May I ask you, why wasn't that considered in the initial recommendations that were brought forward?
Through the Speaker, this is conceived as a pilot project to report back on what the potential impacts might be. It was capped at 100% or waitlisted, knowing that we're really talking about potentially 2 companies with up to 1,000 vehicles across the entire source of permit parking spots, 72,000 spaces across the city, although focused in the core where there's interest in using this type of service. But still, it's potentially 1,000 up to 2,000 if all 4 companies come over a large number of spaces. It's something we want to understand and report back.
And I'll conclude by just asking you to consider, as we move forward with whatever we do, that there are a number of residents who are concerned about the scofflaw aspect of this company, where there are existing problems with them sort of parking wherever they want, and there are concerns that that could exacerbate the existing conditions.
Through you, Madam Speaker, we heard that clearly from the last conversation that we had, and so we've introduced an item on compliance with regard to these permits that we would work out before we actually issued these permits, to ensure we had some additional compliance mechanisms, and that if the company did not follow, we could then revoke those permits, because we know that's been a concern.
It's been a big, yeah.
Through the Speaker, I'll add that the company that's operating in this manner currently is operating without a legal framework for us to manage their operations. But there are other companies who are interested in coming to City of Toronto to work, but only if there is a framework in place, because they want to follow the rules. And we have systems in place in this proposed program that would allow us to, as the GM said, to remove companies who are not complying.
Yes, that's right.
Councillor Davis?
Okay, so I'm struggling to understand, just to be clear, you made no recommendations on the supplementary report, even though you're suggesting the 95% capacity might work. You would require a motion to do that from council today.
Through you, we would, and we've prepared one.
Okay. The second thing, you identified and agreed that a reasonable number of car share or car rental permits, intermittent car rental permits, initially was how many in your first report?
Through you, that number has not changed. It's still up maximum of 2,000 permits total available.
And you said to us just a few moments ago you felt that was an appropriate number, but at that time the proposal was for the whole city. So have you reduced the number now that you've reduced the area down to a much more restrictive area?
Right, same service area. Through you, the service area for the service area that we have for the only free-floating company that's in Toronto right now, Car2Go, is that's the service area that they define. And so that would not change the number of available spaces. The only thing that would change that is if we did not allow the companies to end their trip on fewer streets that were currently in the permit parking system.
I'm completely confused. Last time, the first proposal was this was going to be allowed on all streets that allowed
permit parking.
Parking, and it was broader because there were bylaws that allowed in North York. It was not just permit parking areas the first round.
Through the Speaker, to clarify, previously the free-floating car share permit would be exempt from the 3-hour limit in an area, but would not be allowed to park overnight as per the local bylaws on those streets outside of the core. In this case, we've come back and we've heard concerns about that. It's only in the residential permit parking locations where where you're allowed to be longer than 3 hours.
Right. But the first proposal had greater supply of potential places to park. It was more permissive.
Through the Speaker, theoretically, they would have been able to park in the first proposal, which is no longer on the table.
No, I understand. What I'm trying to compare is the number you have said are acceptable. That's the supply of spaces versus the demand that will be there, which is the 2,500 cars. The first version allowed for a greater area or a greater supply of potential parking spots. Have I got that wrong? Last month's proposal.
The car share companies would operate in an area that the market would attract users. So that area hasn't changed throughout this debate.
Okay. I'm now back where I was on the floor last time when I thought I understood it. I will try once again. Okay. So the challenge has been whether or not the supply meets, or whether the supply of vacant spaces is going to accommodate the increased demand. right? So you've now restricted the area down to only those areas that have permit parking. So the number of spaces, now I understand you're saying the company wants to use only that area anyway, but there was a potential that beyond that they could use other areas in the first model versus this.
Through you, and another company could come in and establish a service area that is different than the one that Car2Go has established.
Right. So now we are concentrating all of the permit.
You had your moment. Okay. I'm sorry, through you, Madam Speaker, the number of car share permits that we propose to allow, 500 as a cap per company for up to 4 companies, has not changed.
Okay, so it's 2,000.
2,000 potentially total. For right now, Car2Go has less than 500 cars in the city.
Okay, just assume there will be 2,000 out. How much vacant parking now is going to be available? What is the capacity where those 2,000 cars, up to 2,000 cars, will have a capacity to park? How many vacant spaces are there with these particular restrictions in place?
Okay, that was your last question, Councillor Davis. Councillor Davis.
So, through you, there's 19,371 available spaces.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Perks.
We don't have it that way.
Thank you. As we've gone around the merry-go-round on this one and had this study come back a number of times, I've raised, and both on the floor of council and with you directly, that I didn't feel the enforcement mechanism was sufficient. What is different in terms of the enforcement mechanism in this report than in the previous one? How is it better?
Through the Speaker, we have established within this report that a enforcement framework would be signed off as part of the permit issuance process, and that would be tracked in terms of being clear that the General Manager of Transportation Services has the authority to withdraw, terminate permits of companies that are not meeting the compliance rates that we established as part of the permit issuance process. That's one of the key changes with regard to compliance.
Okay.
The second key change with regard to compliance, or related to that, is in terms of the payment process of the collection of payments related to tickets that have been issued to the companies. We've established in the supplementary report that companies that are non-payment of tickets of less than 80% in the preceding 6 months would not be issued permits through this program.
Okay, thank you. Speaker, I'm going to need to ask the city solicitor something, but she's not paying attention. So maybe, hello?
Hello?
You might have to hold my time for a sec.
Yeah, I did.
Thank
Can
you.
we have the city solicitor?
And also, I don't think we're anywhere near quorum,
Okay,
but that's life.
Councillor Perks has a question for you. Okay.
So, in this report, it says that they're going to write it into the terms of agreement with the people participating in the pilot, that the general manager can cancel their participation if they violate X, Y, and Z rules. Is that sufficiently strong language that we're not going to be at risk of them coming at us for damages and therefore chill the city from using that power? I know that we have powers that sometimes we're afraid to use because of the legal consequences. I just want to understand from your point, is that the best way to frame it so that the general manager doesn't feel a chilling effect if she tries to use her powers?
Okay, so I'm not concerned.
You're not concerned?
Madam Speaker?
Then I'll move right along. That's all I needed.
It's a privilege. It is a privilege, and the bylaw's clear about that.
Thank you so much. That helps me. Now, we've heard a lot about this study from Berkeley, and I've taken the time to look it up, and I note that the cities they studied were Calgary, San Diego, Seattle, Vancouver, Washington. Do any of those cities have mode shares that are remotely similar to what we have in the study area here in the City of Toronto? And my memory is something like 45% of the households in this area don't even have a vehicle in the household.
Through you, I don't have at hand those mode shares. I know that Vancouver has a pretty robust mode share, and I also know that Seattle has a pretty robust mode share for downtown, for the densest parts of downtown.
But these studies were the citywide. They weren't.
Well, no, they were done. They applied to the service area, so each company will come in to establish a service area. So they
would I be right though? Would I be right to be concerned that the data here isn't necessarily a very good match for an urban area the size of Toronto with I think for a good chunk of this, automobiles are the fourth most common mode.
I think that although there's certainly a densification and intensification in this city that is far and above the other cities that you mentioned, the trends are comparable among the 5 cities that have been studied, and so we believe that the trends would be similar in other cities as applied. There might be other ancillary impacts, but the trends in terms of vehicle ownership and the ability to reduce the number of vehicle miles traveled, vehicle kilometers traveled, et cetera, and the other benefits.
I'm just not aware of a mid-sized city that has vehicle ownership rates in like around 50%. I'm not aware of a single one. None of these. And I don't see any of the cities studied have anything like the intensification or the low vehicle ownership rate that we would experience in Planning District 1, which is roughly the study area.
Through you, I think you're accurate, Councillor Perks, that this is a different scenario. It's a much more intensive scenario with certainly a lot fewer vehicles owned right now. And I think that, as I mentioned earlier, I think the trends in many cases would be comparable, but certainly there's a difference there. And they used those cities, as to my understanding, because those were the companies that had some longevity with free-floating car share, and they wanted to
specifically all just car to go. By the way, this was never peer-reviewed. This was a paid-for study.
I think that there was not, when they did that study in 2015, they were just starting to see additional companies come into the market. So I think car to go was all they had available.
Thank you. Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Speaker. Through you to the transportation staff. I wondered, because it's been touched on, but I don't know if I really got the answer. I really want to understand the rationale for a 100% threshold for the areas where the permits would be, where the cars would be allowed to go, versus the 95, which was contained in the report, versus the notional idea of the 90, which puts it on equal footing to what we know as temporary permits or visitors permits. And really, I want to zoom in on the delta between the 90 and the 95. Can I have staff's estimation as to why we've gone to the night, why you're recommending more than 90?
Through the Speaker, with the 100% or 110% for a wait-listed zone, the concept was to recommend excluding those areas because they have the most pressure in terms of we are not able to issue any new residential parking permits to residents on that street. We've certainly looked at some scenarios around a concept of a 95% capacity, and as was spoken to by the General Manager, there's a good reason for Council to want to do that as part of a pilot project instead of 100% wait-listed areas. With a 90% capacity, you exclude 17,000 parking spots, and you really make the program as such that it's much more difficult and unviable to operate as a pilot. To your point about the visitor parking and the temporary parking permit system, some councillors have asked if there's a way that could be motioned and approved by council to change the threshold for visitor temporary parking permits to match a 95% as part of this program. And we've worked with legal on some language there, and that could certainly be done if that was council's wish.
So other than the viability for the operator, is there any other rationale to, and I appreciate you have neither recommended nor recommended against the 95% threshold, is the only lens the commercial viability? Have we looked at the rights, privileges, concerns, things that we have to take into account from the perspective of the residents? So how do you balance out those two competing factors?
Through the Speaker, Councillor, that's a great question. In terms of being able to provide mobility options to more residents, the 95 or a wait-listed option certainly provides more certainty on whether they can park a free-floating car share vehicle on their street or a street nearby to where they live, versus when it's an option where more areas are excluded, then they have less ability to take those options for transportation. So part of the reason why we want to do this pilot project in order to establish a framework for this service in the City of Toronto is to be able to collect data from these companies to understand the nature of the trips, the origins, destinations, the nature of the demographics of the people who are using the service, so that we can report back about the impacts to residents and make a recommendation that doesn't undue impact those who have permits, but provides the benefits that we're looking for in terms of mobility choices for those people who don't have their own vehicle.
Right. So this covers the entire 416 geographically, with the exception of the wards that don't have any on-street permit parking. How many are those? Geographically.
Correct.
Okay, but the companies have chosen to self-limit their programs, or at least the company that we know of has self-limited to the downtown core. But that's their choice, not ours.
That's correct, Councillor. That's about commercial viability.
Okay. Can you just comment on the rationale for an 18th-month pilot period versus the previous iteration, which was a 12-month?
Through the Speaker, with our experience with pilot project and be able to report back to Council after 1 year of operation, we would recommend being able to collect data for a full year, be able to bring that data back to Council with a recommendation while the program is still in operation, and then be able to make any amendments to the program or cancel the program at that time.
Okay, and we have a couple seconds left. Can you just provide some comments on the geofencing technology and any confidence you have around that adjustments, tweaks, changes through the program can be accommodated by the service provider at a fairly granular level? And really what I'm getting at is this technology is the heart of this program and enabling it to work, and therefore there is some flexibility in it.
Through the Speaker, yes, the geofencing technology, when you use your phone and it's able to show where you are through location services, this is the way that it operates with the way that the use of car share vehicles in a free-floating car share program is set up. It's such that the areas in which the vehicles are permitted to park are geofences either in or out of a service area. So if you're not on a street in which you're permitted to park, you actually cannot end your rental trip in the app.
That's the case today.
That is how it works today on certain streets that the car share companies know there's too much risk for permits, or in areas outside of the service area in which they want to operate. This would allow us as the City of Toronto, with Council's blessing, to set the operating area within the permit parking zones.
Councillor Fletcher.
I've estimated that the amount that's owed currently by Car2Go is about $750,000. Is that right?
Certainly, Car2Go, when we came to the council in September, had paid about 55 or 40 some odd percent of their infractions. They've since increased that somewhat, and the concern about that was one of the reasons why we added language that if the companies did not have a good chunk, 80% of their infractions in compliance, we would not issue permits.
So, but
through this program.
Since we've started this conversation, I think this was in the supplemental that they owe $750,000.
Through you, yes, and they have reduced their amount since then.
By negligible amount. By how much since we started this?
They previously had only paid 34%, and now they've paid 53% of their outstanding infractions. For 2017, which is what we have the data. Yeah, well, we have 2018 data, but it's quite small. It's a small number, although they haven't necessarily paid a significant amount of their infractions. Some of those are in process, and some of those are outstanding, for sure.
And how many cars is it altogether? 2,500?
2,000 would be the maximum, 500 per company.
Divided over 4 companies.
500 eligible for 4 companies with a cap at 2,000 vehicles.
And so for each of those companies, and how many have expressed an interest in placing 500 cars on the street?
Well, so Car2Go today has about 450 cars in operation. They had expressed an interest previously. Two or three others have expressed an interest. Two that are currently in operation within the city, but not in a free-floating model. And then we've also heard from one other, maybe two others, I think a Montreal company that's interested. Oh, sorry, 2 or 3 total have expressed an interest.
Councillor Davis has indicated that how many are you anticipating, I'm sure you've looked at that through their usage, would be in each one of our wards that they would like to use to park those? There's only about 10 wards that they're really interested in. So that's, I'd like to know who they are. So that's 50 cars over each ward. Do you have any sense of that? What market do they really want in?
Through the Speaker, we don't have access to that information because it's commercial information to those companies.
So
this pilot project would allow us to get that information because it would be a requirement of the pilot.
But they haven't told you where they're parking so
Through
far.
the Speaker, they've told us that with the waitlisted scenario, that it would reduce it would affect about 20% of their current trips. People thousands of residents live on the streets that are currently waitlisted.
And why did you think it was fair when you brought in a percentage to commercial Car2Go that was not available to residents for visitors and other emergency situations? On what basis did you initially bring that in?
Through you, we again were trying to balance the impacts of the viability along with the residents who are interested in utilize this service to have access to park in those locations. So that was the initial thinking. I think over the course of the conversations with council in getting more information about the significant concerns around capacity for permit parking, we came back and introduced some additional scenarios.
So you'd agree with me that you could rent a car in Barrie, a commercial vehicle in Barrie, drive to Toronto to see your grandchild, but be unable to get a permit to stay overnight on the street. Meanwhile, a commercial car operation could simply park there with one of these permits, the way this is even set up currently.
We heard that parity issue was of significant importance, and so that's why we have been working with legal on some language to look at how we could bring those two into parity.
But it's not in the report.
Not at this time. It is not in the report.
So you'd be asking us to approve something in our part of the city that's unequal for residents on their own street.
It is not consistent currently with the existing rules on temporary permits, correct.
And you made up the rules. That's not a council rule for existing permits. That's a staff rule.
And that staff rule was made prior to the inception of this concept.
Okay, Councillor Fletcher, that was your last question.
It was approved by council. That rule of temporary permit parking, my understanding, it was at some point was approved by council.
It's in the municipal code.
Okay, Ken. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This was approved by Public Works and Infrastructure. That's correct.
Through you, this proposal was approved by Public Works and Infrastructure. That's correct.
Yeah.
With a motion placed, I believe, by Councillor Holiday.
Okay, and this, and you did a great presentation at that committee. I wish we were doing it here today, but that was a great presentation. In there, you talked a little bit about a number of things, but the impact on the environment that this car share program could have. Could you speak a little bit about those aspects?
Yes, one of the things that we talked about was the reduction of greenhouse gases and emissions, and as I mentioned through Councillor Layton's questions, the one study that we have looked at indicated that there was 29,000 fewer vehicle kilometers traveled with every car share company, which translates to reduced greenhouse gas emissions.
So that's a benefit for the whole city from an air quality perspective. And then what demographic would benefit from this, would you say, in Toronto? I mean, I'm sure there's many, but what specifically demographic might benefit from this being an amenity?
I think there's a number of demographics that would benefit, certainly in areas where there's good transit service and there's good alternatives so that you don't actually feel like you need to own a car for every trip. Certainly in households where you have, where people don't own a vehicle. In Toronto and East York, 33% of households currently do not own their own vehicle. Certainly we've heard examples of people who don't want to own a car, perhaps because as seniors they don't want the burden of owning a car financially, but they would like to drive every now and again, or families that are expanding with children that are becoming of driving age who would like to be able to have access to a vehicle without having to fund the cost of purchase and insurance and all the other related costs.
So this benefits people that don't own cars?
It certainly has a significant benefit for people who don't own cars in that it gives them the ability to drive a car when they want to take a trip that requires that.
Would you say it fits in nicely to the transportation network, the overall network, whether you're a pedestrian, cyclist, maybe you just own a bike, or you're a car owner but you have several members in your family? Does it really cover off all aspects of family life as well as the transportation network? Is it part and parcel of, or could it be?
Through you, I think we've certainly seen in other cities, and I know here as well, that people value, who don't own cars, the ability to have access to one. So I would say yes, it does help to support and enhance the amount of options for people who are living without a car.
Thanks, Sarah. I think I'm shell-shocked by all the... Okay. And just not to emphasize this too much, but I'm just thinking of, a lot of us probably have, or some of us have children in this age group, but I don't know how to, I don't want to label them, what they're currently, that generation's called, but I find a lot of young people, I'll call them, don't actually own cars, certainly in downtown Toronto, but even all over Toronto. The kids graduating from university are, the first thing they're not purchasing anymore is a car. Is that accurate, or is there any stats around that?
Yes, through you. So what we're definitely seeing is a reduction or a delay in the time that people who are age eligible to get a driver's license, they are decreasing or choosing to do that later. Also, what we're finding is there are more options. Those who have the ability to drive are certainly deferring the purchase of a car because the costs are significant, and if they're interested in living in a downtown location where the costs of housing are also significant, reduction in that monthly transportation bill is important. So they often will use options or alternatives such as transit or car share or cycling or walking.
So this might help them invest or be able to pay their rent if they can offset some of the costs of travel.
One of the benefits of car share is certainly the reduction of monthly household costs, and it's part of the overall sharing economy.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Councillor Mihevc.
Yes, thank you. I think through you, Madam Speaker.
Councillor Perks.
I guess the, well, I'll call it the elephant in the room is there's a perception that we're allowing hundreds of new cars into the downtown area, adding to the already many a street that is congested. But if I'm hearing you right, you are saying that despite adding those cars, the way this actually flows out is that there's a net decrease in cars as these programs roll out, because the families that are tempted to buy their first car don't buy their first car. The families that have a second car sometimes go to one car, so that while it seems counterintuitive that you're adding cars over a process of time, and my question is, how long does that process take? At the beginning, I imagine there's a bump up, and then eventually you're actually producing more spots on streets for cars.
Through you, Madam Speaker, you're producing or reducing?
Reducing.
Reducing more spots on streets for cars.
Sorry, no, you're not reducing the spots. You're reducing the number of cars parked on streets because they are quasi-communally being used.
Through you, I couldn't answer how long that would take, but that is why there's so much. There is study and analysis around to see how this impacts car ownership. It's certainly one of the things we would hope to collect from the companies as we move forward with this pilot.
Okay, but it's not the 10-year process. It might be. Okay, you don't know.
I couldn't
okay.
put a time frame.
And the last thing, just to confirm, if I'm in the downtown area and I want to go to Councillor Fragadakis' ward, I park the car, bango, trips over, cost is done. If I'm in the downtown area, which my ward is kind of downtown, and I go to visit Councillor Fillion, then I can park the car, but that meter's running. That's a very expensive trip because it's outside the downtown area. So really the suburban councillors' concern about them being flooded with all these overnight parking folks, highly unlikely that that would occur given the cost structure of the car share companies.
Through you, outside the service area, that would be a very expensive trip.
Right, okay, thank you very much.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Well said, Joe.
Yes?
Sorry, point of order. I'd like to be acknowledged. So 1 hour ago, I had asked for permit parking staff to come down here because I had some questions, and I just want to say that this is the second meeting that we've had of this council on this particular item when I've asked for permit parking staff to be here to answer questions, and they have not been here to answer questions. So I just put that out there. That it would be really nice if members of staff actually stayed for the items so that we could actually have our questions answered.
Okay, so when did you ask for permit staff to be here?
An hour ago. And I've been told that they've gone home.
Maybe we should just defer this, people.
Councillor Robinson to speak.
Oh.
No, but Councillor Robinson is the chair.
I'm not. I'm going to speak at the end.
Oh, okay. Councillor Fragadakis.
So I have a motion, if the clerks can put it up. It's 3 parts, and the first 2 parts are really about equity. And since we have permits, our current rule is if the parking allocation is 90% or higher in an area, we stop issuing visitor parking permits. So I essentially think that the cutoff for free-floating parking permits should be the same. As well, when this was before us earlier this year, it was a 12-month pilot. The Bloor Street bike pilot was 12 months. The King Street Transit pilot is 12 months. Our regular parking permits are issued for 12 months. So really it's a question of equity for me. There's nothing in the report that says why it's suddenly 18 months. So I think 12 months makes sense. So I'm hopeful that this pilot actually might produce some solutions to the transportation woes and parking problems that many of us currently face. However, when one reviews the studies cited in this report, how this will actually play out is not as clear as one might think at first. So one key study cited in the report is by Martin and Shaheen, and Martin and Shaheen noted in their own study that one of the major survey limitations was that it was a one-time inquiry of before and after travel patterns. This required respondents to provide aggregate annual information of travel activity prior to car sharing. So essentially that study is based on a survey that asked short-term car rental users after the fact about their changes in behavior. As well, the study was done right after the economic crisis 10 years ago, and yet they did a survey of a control group. That study also cited another study done way back in 2001, that's about, 17 years ago, of a small Vancouver car-sharing cooperative that engaged in various measures to encourage alternative travel methods by its members. And this is where some of the numbers about how successful these programs. So I put it to you that the behavior of a small group of early adapters in Vancouver may not play out in the same way here with a large-scale program. The Martin and Shaheen report also notes about their survey, across the entire sample, the results showed an overall decline in public transit use that was statistically significant. And as well, car sharing facilitates both an increase and decrease in automobile use by urban residents. So when you dig into the details of these reports, it's not quite the rosy picture that these companies' public relations folks have been telling people. For example, I have concerns about the impact of clustering and our ability to enforce that. We've not had a really good track record about enforcing rules with these companies, given the number of the infractions that they have, that we have in this report here that we got dated in February, some $750,000 for one company in particular. Even the environmental gains are actually not written in stone. To be frank, in my ward, people with parking permits drive around and around in circles trying to find a spot to park in, and they actually have a permit. So this I actually think will make it worse, but having to rebalance cars will also create some congestion. There is some good news though. If this service truly does decrease car ownership, that should decrease the demand for permit parking. And as that decreases, that will mean more parking places will become available. So that gives me some hope. So I'm willing to support a pilot that's fair and reasonable. And my third motion in the longer motion speaks to that we get everybody to pay up their fines and penalties before they're allowed to be issued any permits that would allow them to participate in the pilot, which I think is only fair. So I'm willing to support something like this that's fair and reasonable. I think that the car company's customers will get to cut in line somewhat, but they won't get right to the front of the line. And there are some unknown elements like getting the clustering right and the enforcement issues, which means that there could be some serious unintended consequences. So I actually think we need to really proceed with caution. And if all goes well with this program, it'll grow organically. So I hope that you can find it within yourselves to support my motions.
Did your motion get passed around somewhere?
I haven't seen it.
Councillor Mihevik.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm putting this motion forward for Councillor Ainsley, who was not able to attend, and that is that around making sure that the data collected from the car share companies be made available on our open data platforms and portals within 30 days of receiving it. Madam Speaker, I think the key word for me here is this is a pilot, and I think we should try it out. I take well that there is concern, and that's why you do a pilot. And if we really want to make this data-driven, and if we really want to be smart city, we should try it. There is some ample global evidence that shows that when you introduce car-sharing types of strategies, that the number of cars in geographic areas actually shrink over, we don't know how long, but they actually shrink over time. So if that is the case, then we should try it to see what happens in the Canadian case. We know that parking on streets are at a premium. I think that's why we're seeing some of the passion around here. But we're only going to know if this works. And frankly, I think our younger generation, they want this. They can't afford a $20,000 car expense plus all the other things. Car sharing is here to stay. And we're going to do it, I think, through a little bit of trial and error. Let's try it, and let's see how it works in our community. So I support this this pilot going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doucette.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will try and be quick. I do have one motion, because my other motion overlaps a little bit with Councillor Fragadakis, which I will be asking us to break down. My one motion is basically asking that Community Council will have the authority to revisit the list of the streets which have been excluded from this project. So we can either, at the 6-month issue, when permits normally go out, we can either add streets or remove streets. This is a motion actually I asked for way back when we saw the first report, because I don't think we should have the same streets either in or out for the whole period of a project. So that's that. I am asking councillors to please consider the situation some of us are dealing with right now. Clustering. Some of my streets have 5 to 7 cars parked on their street overnight. This is a street-specific permit parking. So the person who has paid for a permit cannot find a spot on their street. They therefore have to park on another street. I'm getting complaints that they then get ticketed because they're not parking on the street they have a permit for. To me, this report gives us a big solution to change that. The report says we could have up to 2,000 cars. We also know that the 4 companies who are asking for it to be involved in this pilot project, not each of them have 500 cars. So in fact, we're not actually looking at 2,000 permits out there. We're probably looking at less. Also in the report, I think it was attachment 4, shows which wards this will actually be allowed to be used in. And there's 27 out of right now 44 wards where this pilot project can work because it has to be a street which has permitting. It can't be a street where there's no permitting at all. So this will not be allowing cars to park overnight where none are allowed right now. I really want to reassure residents there. And I support exactly what Councillor Mahevik's questioning was around. I do believe that this, over time, will actually reduce the number of cars we have requesting permits on our streets. It will reduce the number of cars we actually have on our streets. It will help improve congestion, because what this will do is it will allow people who don't need a car every day to use a car when they need it, leave it in front of their house, and that, by doing that, rather than having to put it back in a specific spot, we encourage people to use this kind of floating permit cars. So it will reduce the number of cars people own. It may take a bit of time, but it's the first step we need to do. So basically, I am saying to councillors, and I'm not going to use much more time, please support my motion. Let us look at the streets which are being excluded or the streets which are being allowed. Please support letting this pilot project move forward. We need to sort out what is going on our streets now. My residents have been up in arms about getting tickets for something which we have no control over. We have to be able to help our residents solve that problem. Thank you very much.
Well, you know, it doesn't seem that there are too many councillors are even listening to the speakers. There's a lot of conversations going on here. Like, Councillor, Councillor Mahevik, Councillor Fragadakis. Pardon? I know, but we can't hear Councillor Fletcher. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Fletcher, you have a question to Councillor Doucette?
Yes.
Okay.
Councillor, I just want, could you sit down for a minute? I just wanted to be clear on what I heard you said.
Right.
There are cars clustering on a street, up to 5, from a car company, and staying overnight.
Correct.
I'm assuming they're getting ticketed.
Correct.
And now we've heard from our staff that the same companies that are getting ticketed aren't paying their tickets. Meanwhile, your residents have to pay their permit or they're getting a ticket and they have to pay.
My understanding is that when this pilot goes forward, we are requesting that the companies put the ticket back to the driver. Therefore, I believe these drivers will not, which are our residents, will not just be dumping a car where they feel like it, because they, if it's not allowed to be there, will then actually have to pay for the ticket. That will also reduce the expense from the companies, yes.
I'm just talking about how it seems odd.
Oh, I agree.
A company that is abusing the street and the overnight parking rules and harming your residents, we're now even suggesting that they can park wherever in our permit parking without paying all of their fines.
I feel that the pilot project, one of my questions was, during this pilot project, do staff feel that the companies who are included in this pilot project will actually try and abide by crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's? Because in the future they'd like this to continue. I feel by putting the cost of that ticket back to the driver rather than the company, it will actually clear up a lot, and also this clustering clause will alleviate that. So that's why I do support the pilot project.
If we didn't have this and it got turned down, would you support towing all the cars off the street that don't have permits that are commercial vehicles?
I would, but I also feel that the company shouldn't be paying those costs, because once again, if they're not paying them, they should be.
But of course,
I know, I apologize, I'm
sorry,
debating.
I'm asking. I'm sorry.
My motion is to allow us to review the streets on and off every 6 months.
Got it.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, everybody's... It doesn't affect...
We're just staying to keep
I know.
warm.
Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a motion. It's brief. It is just requesting regular reporting on this at frequent intervals, but I'm going to speak to this further in just a moment. I want to express my gratitude to staff for taking on this policy file. It's been before us a number of times, and in each time it has seen improvement and further thought done to it. I think it's at a point that we can all find a way to support some form of it, and that's about to happen, I think, through a series of motions. I want to speak to Councillor Doucette's motion. I think her motion is exceptionally important because I think it provides a safety escape valve that if there is not something that is just right, that it can be dealt with in a manner through a community council or through a body. Through my experience on community council, I see how sensitive parking is. It makes or breaks one's life. It is very difficult, and I appreciate there is an entire plethora of concerns that come to a councillor's office over parking, and there needs to be a way to deal with that. I think the essence of the question before us is, what is the magic threshold? We've heard from staff various pieces of advice. I'm sure you've read the report. You know the implications of choosing one of the different thresholds. And I was very happy with the answer that I got from staff about the explanation between the 90% threshold and the 95% threshold, and about weighing out the pros and cons of moving in on a territory where somebody would not be able to obtain a visitor's permit, weighed against the benefit of having car share available in that neighborhood. And for the reason that I think there'll be a safety escape valve built into this, I'm able to support a 95% threshold. In terms of my motion, my intention is that I would be happy to ask that it be taken away should Councillor Doucette's motion pass. I don't want to ask the staff to come on a quarterly basis, but should her motion not pass, I hope mine would stand, and that would be another way to re-examine this process at a regular interval. And the last thing I'll just make note of is I do take issue with the outstanding tickets. I think the sentiment of this council is that they should be paid up in full. And my questions to staff these were not tickets in dispute. They are tickets that have legitimately been determined that should be paid, and for whatever reason, payment has not been received. I think in terms of the taxpayers of this city, part of our role is to make sure that those funds are collected, and motions that help ensure that gets done, I think, are a positive thing. With that, I hope you'll think through the policy on this and how it affects your ward, and find some way to support this piece of work going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Davis has a question for you.
I have not got your motion. Could you please just tell me? I know you've just
Would you like me? I can read it out.
Could it just go on the screen, please?
I can read it quickly if you want. The City Council direct the General Manager of Transportation Services to report on a quarterly basis to PWIC.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Fletcher.
I moved my name, Speaker. I'm sorry. Don't want to speak right now.
Oh, okay. Councillor Perks.
I have spent an alarming amount of time trying to decide what to do on this issue. Councillor Layton has been, well, you know, I'm deaf in one ear now as a result of the conversations I've been having with him. I think it's important to step back and ask ourselves what we're really doing here, because there's some ways we talk about this that actually don't bear any relationship to reality. The first is we have to be very clear This is not about citizens in the City of Toronto sharing cars. There's no sharing of cars going on here. What is happening is in the global marketplace for transportation, particularly in large cities, the young generation that's younger than me is buying cars and getting driver's licenses at a much lower rate than my generation did. In other words, the Daimlers and Fords and Chryslers of the world are, and not you, Councillor Ford, are losing market share in the transportation marketplace. They're losing it dramatically, actually. It's the sharpest downturn in car ownership since 1945. So what they are doing is responding to that by changing the way they sell their product. Daimler wants people driving cars. They don't want them riding bicycles, they don't want them on public transit, and they don't want them walking to work. Because if that happens, Daimler doesn't do the one thing that they do and have to do, which is return a profit to their shareholders. The effect of short-term car rental, free-floating short-term car rental, is to take a public asset, our streets, and provide it as a means for a car company to increase their market share and make more profit. That is a fact. It's indisputable. This is not sharing. This is using a public asset to provide what I think is effectively a subsidy to one of the world's largest truck manufacturers, to the company that owns the brand Mercedes-Benz. Okay, be clear in your minds that's what we're doing. The second thing is that it's argued over and over again that there is an environmental benefit here because we will reduce the overall amount of vehicle travel. And that's based largely on a study done by a group that's affiliated with the University of Berkeley. The work they did, by the way, never appeared in any peer-reviewed journal. It was bought by Department of Transportation, I believe, in California. They wanted a study done. So it was paid for by a government, and the data was supplied by Car2Go. Never peer-reviewed. And there are a couple of things that are wrong with that study that we need to be mindful of if we're going to use that as any kind of guide on the environmental benefits. The first is that the cities that we're being compared to are Calgary, San Diego, Seattle, Vancouver, and Washington. Not a single one of those cities has anything like the overall mode share that we have, nor do they have the very high percentage of households that do not own cars. In the study area, the percentage of households that do not own cars is somewhere between 45 and 50%. So the likelihood is that actually we are going to have many more people who are not driving currently start driving as a result of this pilot. The data that's here simply isn't comparable. If they had compared us to Manhattan or Berlin or Paris or Munich or London or some other city that has the kind of core density and core mode share that we have, I might rely on it. The other thing that's wrong with their study is it's all self-reported and it's based on a one-year period. People don't make long-term decisions about whether they're going to buy a car in a year. If you look at any of the work that happens around mode changes, people deciding to get rid of their car and take public transit, if you look at places like Zurich where they've actually been able to affect that, it takes about a decade, because that's how long people hold their cars for. So a one-year study, self-reporting, doesn't tell us anything. So, no sharing and very big doubts on whether there's a congestion or environmental benefit. We need to be mindful of that. That being said, while I have doubts, I don't have proof. And when I have doubts and not proof, I can live with a pilot study. But I want us to be very mindful that within that year, we will not see the kind of mode share that some people, switch, that some people who are advocating for this have claimed.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Councillor Fletcher, did you put your name back up? It's Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Speaker. I do have a motion. And that motion...
You want a quorum call? Okay. Quorum call. Okay, quorum call. But when you come and press your buttons, you're supposed to stay in your seats. Like, it doesn't help us if everyone disappears after they press their buttons. Well, quorum is what you have in the council chambers, not upstairs.
Councillor Mihevc, please.
Councillor Perruzza?
Councillor Fillion, please.
There are 25 members in the chamber, Madam Speaker.
Jesus. Okay. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Speaker. I have a motion. We've been speaking today about, if it can go on the screen, about the fact that what's before us would allow cars to go, and I'm going to call them cars to go because that's what people understand it. To be able to park and have greater access than visitor parking. So right now, under the municipal code, we do not allow issuance of temporary permit parking when the parking is at over 90%. So what this does, it says, okay, we will allow temporary parking for visitors at 95%, and I hope that, and I will support the recommendation for 95%, which is Councillor Fragadakis' second fallback position in terms of the capacity we will provide, or the areas that we will provide access for car to go. And I hope that's understandable. It makes it fair and consistent for people we want to allow on, or permit holders have access. It also says that at 95%, we will allow on our permit parking streets for car to go, with the conditions that we will enforce where there is clumping. And I will support the other recommendations of Councillor Fragadakis, which is to make the pilot project 12 months, make sure all the payment of the outstanding fines are made, and that we do it on a pilot basis. And just as as Councillor Perks said, I too found this difficult, and I find it difficult because of all of the issues that I deal with, probably on the most frequent basis in terms of complaints, it has to do with parking. We are a very dense, congested, downtown urban neighborhood in one half of my ward, and the other half is a more suburban orientation with driveways and people who have cars and parking on site. So there is no doubt in my mind that people want to use car to go and other temporary car rental arrangements. and don't own cars and use this as one mode of transportation mixed with the use of public transit. Lots of people are doing that. My children do that. They also combine it with other modes of transportation like cycling and taxis. And they risk their lives if they take Uber. Sorry. Yeah, maybe. By my sons. I do have concern, though, about the impact on public transit. And if you see what Councillor Ainsley talked today about what ABC is attempting to achieve in Riverside. It's not called Quayside. And I read a very frightening article in an American magazine that what they want to do is to design streets that are no longer in grids. And they don't want to design it in grids because a grid is intended to support public transit. And they are in smart cities designing streets that go like this, that get closer to people's private homes, because they want to have monopoly on private quasi-public transit. And that public transit becomes the thing of the past, and these massive multi-million-dollar corporations are moving into delivering public transit. And so that worries me, that if more and more access to the public realm, the public right-of-way, even TTC is looking at the Uber bus or whatever that they call it, that we will lose the basic orientation that we have right now, which is to improve access, reliability, and quality of public transit, to make it the #1 choice for urban transit in our city, along with cycling and other active transit.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Campbell, questions?
Just a quick clarification. On the 95%, I think I'm not understanding this right. Does that mean that if out of 100 permit parking spaces, 95 are allocated, it's permissible to have car share or not?
Yes.
Yes.
At 95%, if that carries, I don't know what will happen if they don't match at the end of the day today, but right now, 95%, if there are no residents seeking a permit, in other words, everyone who lives there, a resident lives there, has got a permit that wants a permit, there's no wait list for residents, and it's at 95%, or 90% right now, then we will have visitor parking, allow visitor parking.
So even with...
So what this says is not at 90%, but at 95%, we will allow visitor parking.
So
and we will allow car to go, whereas the...
I'm just trying to get the clear. I'm still not clear.
Okay.
So if only 5% of the spaces are available...
Yes.
5% are available.
If 5% are available...
That's all, because it's so that means that more people will have permitted parking, that there's more of a chance than at 90% of them maybe not finding a spot because there's these cars there.
Huh?
Never mind, I'll talk to somebody offline.
What I'm saying is there's 5% capacity.
It's okay, it's okay.
No, I want to answer this. There is 5% capacity available after residents have sought permits.
That's all.
That 5% capacity will be available for visitors and for car to go. So we will be treating car to go like visitors equally, whereas prior the proposal did not do that.
Okay, thank you.
It allowed better access car to go.
Okay. Councillor Fletcher.
I would call the question. I'm going to speak very quickly because Councillor Davis has sorted out one of the things that has been a problem, that originally what was brought to us was very unfair. Because as these are temporary overnight permits, technically, that's what you've got. They have the right to stay overnight. And so does somebody else coming in from out of town. And it would have set two different playing fields. So right now, that's one playing field. It would be the same. I'm going to support Councillor Fragadakis at 90% because that's what we've had for visitor parking. That's been our threshold and our standard. And after 6 months, let's see how that goes. We can add streets. We can make some changes. We can come back and make it. I'd rather start slowly. I have a real problem with 5 cars on a street in Councillor Doucette's area, clustering 5 cars over and over and over again, racking up ticket after ticket after ticket, not paying it, and then coming and saying, well, we want to stay overnight on the street. So whoever has the motion that says, well, you have to pay your fines first before we're giving you that access, I hope that's a unanimous vote. Because who else would we do that for? So that point, that is what I'm suggesting. We should just vote on this, although I hate voting on it at 5:30 on Friday night. There are no members there's one member, Councillor Holiday has a few little spots in his ward. I think and Councillor Campbell, Councillor Robinson might, but this is a really thorny issue. You're right, Councillor Davis, that's what we get. In our wards, people shift one side to the other after every 2 weeks. In the summer, they're supposed to have their streets cleaned. Well, they don't always have their streets cleaned, but they always get a ticket if they haven't moved exactly on time. In my ward, there's 7,500 permits. Councillor McMahon, 8,000 permits, and then it goes down from there. It is a big issue for people that are living there, and that's how our streets are being used. So I think having a way that's fair, that others are able to use that on a temporary basis, have access to a car, yes. But I'm concerned because we weren't being fair when it first came in, and we didn't say they had to pay their tickets when we first got this report. We've had to say those things. But I'm glad we are saying those things. But it remains, I'm concerned about it because if that's how we started, that was what was being suggested to us, imagine what a mess we would have on our hands here with a company that doesn't think they have to pay their fines.
Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you, staff, for bringing this forward yet again to Council and for spending so much time late with us. I moved the deferral last time just because I thought that there were still questions that needed to be answered before this cake was fully baked and could pass Council. I'm glad that we're here now with the additional information in front of us. I'm a car share member, so I'm a member of actually 2. There's absolutely zero conflict with that, to make it clear. I'm a member of 2 car sharing companies because one suits one need, one suits another. I'm probably, and I'm going to say this very carefully with respect to my colleague Councillor Perks, I think I'm probably the only household in Council that doesn't own a car. The only household, I was very careful. You don't have a license, but your household has a car, because my wife and I don't, we don't have a car. And so we've chosen to live that way. We do live in a downtown neighborhood. It's close to bike lanes. It's close to public transit. We have that luxury. I know that not all of you can do that. I appreciate that some of your neighborhoods just don't facilitate that, and the nature of our work would never allow for that. I'm not trying to say that in any way to try to downplay or try to be high and mighty on this. I have that luxury. However, it means I have a very, very good understanding of how this system works. And the downfalls of our current arrangement, where we expect every car to have a home and always be used out of that home. There are 2 different kinds of auto share. One has a dock, let's say, that you always have to get back to end your trip, and the other, this free-floating model, allows you to drop it off any which place. Now that means, though, if I need to use a car, one of these for these trips, in the free-floating ones, I'd have to go find a lot that it's in, several blocks away walking, or I normally bike to them, get the car, take it, run the errand, but then I'd have to return that car to the same place. Now, when I use the docking method most often to do big shopping trips to IKEA, trips to bring my kids to Nona's house because I know I've got to bring something large home with me. Otherwise, we'd be on the subway. And so having that standard dock works. But if you're taking it out to a part of town that isn't well served by transit, or you got to bring, let's say, an appetizer or an entree over to a friend's potluck dinner, and you want to drive it over rather than lug it on the subway, I have been in this position before, it is often much easier just to take one of these car-to-goes, run it over, drop it off, and then figure out how to park it on the other end. But you do, because I don't take Uber. Thank you, Councillor Fragedakis. I would take taxis in some cases, but sometimes it makes much more sense just to do it this way. So I got to tell you, it actually would be very helpful if we were able to park these spots on streets with permits. Now, I also have experience because my entire ward has permit parking. There's not a street on my ward that's not a main street that doesn't have permit parking. I understand the pressures. Trust me. We all, and any councillor that has parking permits on their streets understands these pressures. But this is it's what some of the data has shown, and what I know from my own personal experience, is this type of service allows people to live without cars. And I will give Councillor Perks this point. I will concede this one point, that it is really not by definition car sharing. So I will go with micro car rental, or something like short-term car rental, because that's essentially what it is. But I still think that it does accomplish some of the things that are laid out in the report. There is evidence that suggests that it reduces vehicle ownership.
But I guess
there is evidence that it reduces household transportation costs and vehicles traveled, that it reduces greenhouse gas emissions through that. And families that use car-to-go instead of owning a car have higher rates of walking, cycling, and transit use. I do agree with that, unlike my colleague. Because one thing we talked about today, all this concern has been around households that own cars being able to find a spot on their street. But I would ask you, what about those households that don't own cars but live on that street? Do they not have a very similar right to have some kind of access to parking on that street at a reasonable rate? And given that this is 9 people sharing one car or using one car, it is important for us to at least explore the possibility of this being one of the
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Campbell, it's the clock behind you. Councillor McMahon.
Right. Thank you. So why do people use car share? It's convenient, flexible, cost. They don't need insurance coverage because it's covered. And it is environmentally conscious. I will argue with more conscious. When you are car sharing, I'll argue with my colleague over there, Councillor Perks. And lots of people are actually in Toronto are getting rid of their cars. And millennials are not buying their cars. So it's up to us as decision makers to allow for the idea of other modes of vehicle use. And so what's happened so far is we've debated, and we've been back and forth on this. This is our second round. We defer it. And, you know, if we say we're green, if we say we're innovative, if we say we're world class, if we say we're supportive of the sharing economy, and I do think it's a form of sharing, whether it's a not-for-profit or if it's a for-profit, it's a form of sharing, sharing the vehicles and taking fewer off the street, or more off the street. And if we say we're all about flexibility and offering alternatives for car usage, then we need to support this motion, and we need to support it now because people want to see action. And less talk, more action. So hoping for a unanimous vote on this today. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson to speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll be very brief just to say the benefits of car sharing, and they've been touched on, is reducing vehicle ownership rates, reducing household transportation costs, reducing vehicle kilometers traveled, and then our good old greenhouse gases and emissions, reducing and increasing other modes of transportation, walking, cycling, transit use. And we've heard from our general manager that 33% of households in Toronto currently don't own a vehicle. So I, like some of my colleagues, would like to see this dealt with today. It's gone on too long, back and forth, up and down, to committee, back to council, bounce, bounce, bounce. So it's time we made a decision. I hope we can make one today. I will just tell you a couple quick things. If we go with the 12-month pilot versus the 18-month pilot that's been recommended by staff, you will end up with only 9 months of data in the 12-month with the 12-month version that's been put forward in a motion. So that's for you to decide if you feel that will be significant enough. Usually staff like to gather 12 months of data, which they can't do in the 12-month period. And as we all know, there's an election in the middle of all this. And then related to the 90% versus the 95%, staff prefer the 95% just simply because it creates more access and equity with visitor parking permits, etc. So you can decide how you vote, but I think it's time now that we actually, as Councillor McManus said, take action and make a decision.
Okay, that's it. Take
1, 2, 5.
Okay, the order is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 5, 3, 4. Yes, Councillor Holliday.
Just, thank you for the microphone. Can you just explain how the voting will work on the 1A and B? If one fails, is it 2 votes that we would take?
Okay, we'll vote on 1A first. If that doesn't carry, we will vote on 1B. Okay, here we go. On favor? We're voting. Oh, you want recorded? Oh, okay. I just thought that I could speed it up.
Councillor Palacio, please.
Councillor Peruzza, your vote, please.
Part 1A of motion 1 does not carry. The vote is 11 to 13.
We take B and then we take 2 afterwards, and 2 and 3 can go together, please? I'd like to split it one more time.
Okay. Recorded vote.
Councillor Peruzza, please. Councillor DeGiorgio, Councillor Wong Tam.
Councillor Palacio, your vote, please.
Part 1B carries 19 to 5.
Part 2? Okay, recorded vote. Oh, okay. Okay, separate. They don't want to see all that yellow.
Members, we canceled the previous vote and restarted it, so you may have to press your buttons again.
Councillor Fillion, please. Councillor Fletcher, please.
Councillor Fletcher.
Part 2 does not carry. The vote is a tie, 12 for each side. That's what happened.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor McMahon, Councillor Wong Tam.
Plus interest.
Part 3 of motion number 1 carries unanimously, 24 in favor.
Okay, motion 2 by Councillor Mihevc. All in favor? Carried. Councillor Fletcher wants motion 2 recorded.
Councillor Fletcher, please.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor Wong Tam.
Motion number 2 carries unanimously, 24 in favor.
Motion 5 by Councillor Davis. Recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor Wong Tam. Councillor Perks and Councillor Karygiannis, please.
The motion carries 20 to 5.
Motion number 3 by Councillor Doucette. Recorded vote.
Councillor DiGiorgio, please. Councillor Matlow, Councillor Davis, Councillor Perks.
Motion number 3 carries 22 to 3.
Motion 4 by Councillor Holliday. Yes, Councillor Holliday?
I wondered if I could, so if I may withdraw this, because I think it's redundant now that Councillor Doucette has successfully passed a motion.
Okay, so Councillor Holliday is withdrawing his motion. All in favor, carried.
One more. Oh, no.
Item as amended.
Yeah, let's see who stayed here to the bitter end.
Oh, yeah, everything.
Do we want a recorded vote? Yes.
Done.
Oh, yes.
I think Councillor Holliday's...
No, it's not.
Councillor McMahon, please. Councillor Davis.
The item as amended carries 23 to 2.
Councillor Hart, you have a motion to introduce the confirming bill.
Yes, thank you, Speaker. That leave be granted to introduce a bill to confirm to the point of the introduction of this motion the proceedings of City Council meeting 39 on April 24th, 25th, 26th, and 27th, 2018.
Shall leave be granted to introduce this bill? Recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, Councillor DiGiorgio, Councillor McMahon, Councillor Wong Tam, please. Councillor Davis, Councillor Matlow.
Councillor Fragedakis, please. Thank you.
The motion to introduce the confirming bill carries unanimously 24 in favor.
Shall this bill be passed and declared as a bylaw? Recorded vote.
Councillor Perks, please. Councillor Perruzza, Councillor McMahon, Councillor Wong Tam.
I thought you were going to St. Patrick's Day or something.
Easy. You're on the mic, eh?
Councillor Wong Tam, please, your vote. And Councillor Davis.
Councillor Mahavik, please.
The motion to enact the confirming bill carries 24 to 1.
Okay, before we adjourn, I'd like to thank the staff because the last 3 days have been very stressful for all the staff. And thank you to members of council. Meeting adjourned. Have a nice weekend.
And Ward 32 clerks. And Ward 27 clerks. And Ward 31 clerks. You guys don't have it. No, sorry, don't even try. Yuli, let's just say. That may be. Yeah.